Ocarina of Time is definitely the Jimi Hendrix experience of 3D gaming. Both revolutionized the landscapes they were part of, and in the modern age have caused many arguments over how overhyped they are. Hendrix might have been great at guitar, but he wasn't always the best singer. He'd constantly play out of tune, and he'd get really high. But at the end of the day, I think people can find charm in the imperfections of something good. Link and Hendrix are also both left-handed. Ocarina is full of innovations to dungeon design and combat mechanics that really did change the way 3D action adventure games were made, and these days it can be very easy to forget this. The 3D is a bit primitive by modern standards, and a lot of its innovations have been iterated and improved upon in similar games after the fact, but it's still one of my favorites, so I want to check it out again. Because of how huge this game is, a lot of fucking people worked on it. It had 5 directors, but the top dog is still this guy, Miyamoto. He was the producer, and he made Donkey Kong. He most likely spent the majority of development communicating a vision and working with the directors. He's a pretty important guy, but he does have his detractors. He's not the nicest guy for one. Don't let that smile fool you. His face is just like that. I once talked to a guy who worked with him actually, and he wasn't a big fan. He told me Shiggy would just show up to his department, be cold as fuck to the staff, but when it was time to clock out, he'd try and kick it with everybody like he was just one of the guys. I feel like he was telling the truth because later on I found this article interviewing the Argonaut guys who made Star Fox, and I guess Miyamoto would just come in and start smoking and talking about trees. That kind of eccentric personality probably contributed to a lot of his best ideas, but he's also got that old school Japanese businessman mentality and can be a bit stuck in his ways. This is supposedly why several series have been totally fucked up. But I mean, I don't know, Bukowski beat his wife, and that shit was on TV, so imagine how it was privately. And speaking of imagining shit, Gandhi shoved shit up little girls' asses, and then made them do it to him too. So in comparison, sabotaging Paper Mario isn't such a bad trade-off. Of course, no one's perfect, and sometimes people are just dicks. Not everyone can be an Eric Johnson, but I think it's important to bring up these shortcomings before I suck on his little pixelated cock for 2 hours. We'll get more into the directors and others as we keep trucking along, since a lot of guys made some really important contributions, but they're more specific things. So the main thing to understand here is that Shiggy is the man, and Ocarina of Time kicks ass. Oh, sorry about that. That's my dad. The opening cutscene has the main character having what he finds to be a bone-chilling nightmare about this guy who looks at him disapprovingly. Then he wakes up and finds out his stepdad got AIDS from the same guy. It's a talking tree that this other kid Maito won't let us talk to, and says that if we're gonna help, we need to be armed. Link is this green guy we're playing as. The first thing we have to do is get a knife and shield, and I like how the game doesn't tell you where to get these. You just have to figure it out by exploring our home here in Kokiri Forest. To get the shield, you gotta find rupees in different locations and buy it from a shop. The area has these cool little obstacle courses to test your ability to move with the analog stick and understand the auto jump. When you complete these little hops, you're rewarded with some money. It's the first time Link was in 3D, and this is a nice sweet spot of being taught how Link moves without too much control being taken away from you. So if you're replaying, there's a lot of tutorials you can just skip. The NPCs give you some early game tips, but also do a great job of showing the Kokiri's culture while giving some insight into how they see Link. One cool thing about Kokiri is how only their fairies can be seen from a distance, but as you get closer, they start to fade in. Whoa! There's a lot of effort put into little things like this throughout the game to really sell the world and its inhabitants. Getting the knife requires figuring out how to crawl through spaces and open chests, and after getting it, there's a lot of grass really encouraging you to play around with Link's attacks. Even the signs can be cut down, which wasn't a common thing in games at the time. It'd be fun if you could read from the cut-up sign and have the text stop prematurely, but nah. Link reads so fast too, he seems like he'd win the spelling bee and act all shitty about it. He'd give the Today Show interviewer a hard time with his literal answers to the questions. Such a shithead. Learning the game through getting your equipment ends up being pretty efficient because before you know it, enemies are popping out, and you're swinging at shit, and you're in a dungeon, you already know what you're doing. The first enemies are these plants, and they can't move, which makes them easy to approach. Yeah, fuck you, Morrissey. The inside of the Deku Tree is the first dungeon, and feels built from the ground up to get you used to problem solving in a 3D space, and it doesn't fuck around. This room where you get the slingshot and need to knock down the ladder stumped me for a whole day. It was Christmas, and I was all excited, and this shit ruined it. I was 6 years old, so it didn't feel natural for me to look up at the ceiling like this. You can't do that on Sega Genesis. But even 25 years later, getting the player to look up like this is still tricky to do in games. You have to give a very direct prompt or visual indicator, or they never want to do it. So it's important to have something like this early on to really drive home the need for looking around and feeling out the environment so that by the time you solved all these puzzles and killed the spider, all this 3D shit becomes second nature. Putting this right up front at the start of the game, in 1998, was Shiggy's way of saying things are gonna change. This is like when Obama was elected and he was like, yeah, I'm fucking black and shit. They didn't need to completely reinvent the wheel though. The foundation for 3D dungeon designs was already set in A Link to the Past. Dungeons there were designed as if they were a 3D environment. There's elevation and terrain, and dungeons have floors, which means you can jump or fall down holes to descend to rooms below. In Ocarina, this idea is used right away in this first dungeon and gets you thinking with gravity on top of that in order to break the spider web at terminal velocity. But in a true 3D environment, they can now design with more nuance. You can have slopes and a camera that lets you interact with stuff on the walls and ceiling, which they take advantage of with the first boss, Skoma. It's a game of positioning yourself well on the ground while winding up your shots to hit it in the eye. I love how bright the eye is. It's great for signaling to the player that they should hit it, but it contrasts so well with how dark the rest of the room is and gives the fight a great mood. Usually first bosses are kinda underwhelming, but this one always feels great to take down. Even though the game teaches you a lot visually, our fairy Navi will stop us every once in a while to give hints, which can be alright if you're playing it for the first time. She'll alert you when enemies are around also. There's this cute little interaction with these Deku Scrubs too. They're there to teach you how to use your shield, but after deflecting an attack, they'll run away and you can chase them down. And then they start talking to you and giving you hints. They eventually tell you how to solve a puzzle in the final room, which seems to be a Michael Jordan reference. Miyamoto wanted every enemy to have this amount of interaction, but in the end, only these guys truly realized his vision. The rest of the enemies don't play fun little games like this, they just beat the shit out of you. After such a fun time, this game takes a break by having the tree give us this stone and some exposition. The text isn't the fastest in this game, but it's even slower during this history lesson he gives. That's why people use the Japanese text when they're trying to beat it really fast. The game kind of front loads these cutscenes on you, and I think I prefer it this way. It gives us context to the world we're in and establishes our goals of getting more of these stones. And it takes a bit, but by the time we're in the second dungeon, we know everything we need to know, and it's all front sailing. And things are only just starting. We're about to leave Kokiri and get into the real meat and potatoes of the game. After talking to Maito again. This fucking showed. Alright, now let's get going. Oh fuck. Our friend Saria wants to wish us goodbye with this nice ocarina. But Link's about to throw this shit in the trash the second he finds another one. He's looking at it like he's trying to be impressed with a Christmas card. We can leave now, but the acoustics out here are great, and I just got this thing, so I think I want to practice my scales. Never know I'm gonna be asked to perform, and I don't want to go out and eat my balls. Oh man, Hyrule Field, I love this shit. The music is so great. Oh fuck, is this like being done on purpose? It's like when you're about to head out the door to ride your bike, but mom and dad are being lame and stop you to make sure you wear your helmet so you don't bump your head, and knee pads so you don't scrape your knees, and cock rings so you don't get too excited when you go down the hill. Fucking pacifier in your mouth and butt plug in your anus. This place is great, even in the early game when there's not much to do. I can't help but love the scale of it, the blue sky with the music. I love every corner of this place. There's also where we're introduced to a flowing time. It goes from day to night, a first for a Zelda game. In Hyrule Field, the sun will go down after a few minutes and the overworld music will fade out with it. You hear a wolf's howl introducing you to the night version. Hyrule Field is mostly barren during the day, but at night there's these enemies called Style Children that come out, and there's this fun thing to them where they'll come out bigger and bigger as you kill more of them, and eventually drop a bunch of rupees. The only thing we can do at the moment is go to Hyrule Castle and see Zelda, which makes us do this weird stealth section I've always found kinda janky. I just found one rudimentary path to get past these guards as a kid, and I've used it ever since. I don't know if there's more paths or what, but it doesn't really matter since there's only one other stealth section in the game, and by that time you have a deadlier arsenal that lets you quickly take care of the problem. Oh man, I love this part. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see Yoshi. Hey, oh, it's here. Yes, there he is. There he is. Yes, yes, there he is. Yes, yes, there he is. Oh, and Zelda. Yeah, she's real important. I gotta say, years ago when I was playing this game for the first time, I had to quit. There was nothing wrong with the game, but it was just getting awkward. You see, I put my own name in the file, like I do that in every game, and I was just shocked to see the game actually called me that. At first it wasn't that bad, it was just a tree, but then I got to Zelda and she looked all happy to see me and giggled and smiled and said my name. I had to turn the game off because it was just too unrealistic. But even though I've watched this scene several times at this point, I always end up tapping out. You'd think it'd be exciting to see Zelda since she's in like the title of the game, but she just meanders and tells me stuff the tree already said. And poor Link can't talk to her, so he can't let her know that he's already heard this shit before. Oh Oh god, I didn't mean to skip all that shit. She's just trying to tell me not to trust Ganondorf because he's a minority. But there's been so much slow text at this point that I just want to like skip it as fast as I can. The issue is that Zelda, the game, is more about the adventure and using new abilities and knickknacks to get to new places. Zelda needs to give me the hook shot or something and I'd be more involved. See, this chick over here, Impa, she has the right idea because she's gonna give us our first song which we can play in front of triangles, go through waterfalls and shit. Zelda's Lullaby. Link, calm down, it's not a race. Zelda's gonna have insomnia. Yeah, there we go. Impa wants us going into Death Mountain, but there's a lot of optional stuff we can do on the way there, mainly getting 2 bottles and 2 songs. Both bottles involve collecting chickens, but the more fun one is in Malon's house in Long Lawn Ranch. So the minigame is just about seeing where he throws the chickens and grabbing them as soon as you can. No, Link, don't grab that! The minigame just ends if you do that, and you have to restart. The minigame itself is fun. You have to find the right chickens hidden in the pack. There's a time limit to get you really rushing, and the music just further gets the anxiety going. It's kind of odd to me that Long Lawn Ranch is the hub of Hyrule. It's in the middle of the map. I understand Hyrule Castle couldn't be in the middle since they want to keep that massive scale that they have. So a smaller town that's isolated like Long Lawn Ranch that doesn't lead anywhere else is a must. But I feel like it might have been nice to have it have some more utility. Maybe a shop could have helped with that, but it also might not fit with the aesthetics of the area. There are farms, so they only really have milk. I guess they could have sold different kinds of milk to do what the potions do later. But whatever, I like it as a hub, even if it doesn't offer much. It's just a cozy place with nice music. I love to come here at night and fuck with the birds. Just shoot them with my slingshot and wake up the whole family. You know, it always bugged me that it's called Long Lawn Ranch. Was it named by the same guy in Mario 64 who came up with Cool Mountain? Or Dire Docks? Fucking Moo Meadows and Dry Desert. You can get a Pona song here from Malon that lets us fill up bottles with milk whenever there's cows around. Milk is great in the early game because it restores 5 hearts and can be used twice. Just chug the whole thing, Link. Don't be a pussy. But luckily this means that with the amount of hearts we have now, for the first 3 dungeons we basically have 2 full HP recoveries per bottle. And we're about to have 3 of them. Now no one can fuck with us because we have milk. It's cool because we already associate milk with helping kids grow and calcium and all that, so we kind of just instinctively get that young Link is going to get more out of it. But it's kind of weird. Even as an adult, you never really see Link eat. It's always just this red applesauce and green applesauce and whatever the fuck this is, Go-Gurt or something. You'd think Link would be like one of those anime protagonists that's all gluttonous like Goku or Homer Simpson, but no, he's all about the liquids. Link is hardcore, he just drinks milk straight from the cow. And when he's older, he drinks it straight off of Malon. What is Long Lawn milk anyways? Does it taste different from regular milk? What makes it long? How do you make it? Okay, let's check this out.
And now, let's cook with Rich and Jess.
Oh.
Hey guys, and welcome to another exciting episode of Let's Cook. I'm Rich.
And I'm Jack.
Never
What
mind.
are we gonna do today, Jackie?
Okay, look, I don't need to know what Long Lawn milk is, okay? I'll just go the rest of my life not knowing. That's fine. The most convenient psalm we can get is the one in this graveyard in Kakariko Village. After making our way through some spooky shit, we can read something from the tomb that gives us the sun song.
The sky at night is the same. The stars, the moon.
It lets us change from day to night whenever we want, without having to go into Hyrule Field or Death Mountain Trail and wait. Time stays static in towns because most NPCs aren't out at night, and if they wanted to have the clock run, they'd have to add schedules for the villagers, and that's just some advanced shit they weren't ready to do until the sequel. We want to be heading to Goron City to get their stone, but their leader Darunia doesn't want anything to do with us because everyone here is dealing with this big guy called King Dodongo in Dodongo's Cavern. To get Darunia's attention, we actually have to go back home and find Saria to learn a groovy new song to play for him. It's a pretty long trek quick back though, which is a bit of a chore to do with young Link and his little legs. Traveling long distances like this was probably designed for when you can ride around on a fucking horse, which makes this game like twice as fun. Hell, I'll ride around Hyrule Field just for the enjoyment with no objective in mind. It's great. But without the horse's speed, it becomes a bit tedious. So it's a good thing that if you're perceptive enough, you can take one of the Deku Sticks you got in the previous dungeon and use it to light these torches to get into the Lost Woods really quickly. This place has a couple shortcuts which are actually pretty decently useful. The reason they're all in this one area is because it's the only place in the game with an ambiguous location. Ocarina has a great sense of consistency between maps, and it's one of the things that makes Hyrule feel like a real place. And that otherwise grounded feeling to this game is part of what makes going through the Lost Woods feel like such a mystical journey. There's only one real path to Saria, but you're constantly presented with new places to go in. Most just take you back to Kokiri Forest, but there's a couple actual branches that take you to some fun extras, like that bridge where Saria gave us the Ocarina. Now we can run around the lower section, and there's also these guys selling nuts. That constant threat of being taken back to Kokiri Forest when going into most of these exits creates this feeling of insecurity and subverts what you come to expect out of this world. But you're not left completely in the dark. On the first time through, the game uses some dynamic music to let you hear the melody as you approach the correct path. You ever play this game with headphones? Things are always panned really far. It's like I'm listening to the Doors on stereo. We also meet a new enemy on the way to Saria called a Wolfos. This is one of the easiest enemies in the game, but for some reason people have a really hard time dealing with them.
You little fuckers.
There's actually a couple of Wolfos here, and I recommend you going for the spin attack as often as you can. See if you can get a damage on both of them.
You guys are dicks. Just...
It's not really considered a cheat. It is a modification. I do not support cheating at all. I play this game enough times, I figured that this sprite modification looks pretty cool, so...
That didn't work.
Doesn't affect gameplay, and so it's completely fine.
Isn't there something with backflips for these guys?
Yeah, I'm kind of doing it. No.
All you need to do is wait for them to approach, and then hit the tail after they attack. As an adult, they die in a single hit. Even as a kid, Link can kill them in one hit if he's really upset. At least the plants in the Deku Tree actually make you approach them because they're like stationary. With these ones, you don't even have to worry about that. They'll just come and throw their hitbox at you. Just tap back and press B. As it turns out, the melody we've been hearing was Saria playing her song, and she takes some time to teach it to us. It sounds great, but it's only really used to progress the game and get a heart piece. It's a lot like the Song of Storms, which also sounds great, but is also only used to progress the game and get a heart piece. I guess you can play the song to hit Saria up on her phone, but all she'll do is give you some little tip, like, hey Link, you know, you have to go do something in the mountains, my hair is green. But Navi already does that without even needing to get permission. Maybe they were trying to create a preference system, like in the forgotten Sega Saturn game, Bulk Slash, where you pick up different chicks that give you the same directions, but in a slightly different tone of voice. That's not really important though. All that really matters is that after playing the song for Darunia, we get the bomb bracelets, and now Link has enough confidence to pick up these bombs from the plants. And these things get used extensively in Dodongo's Cavern. I think the bomb flower is brilliant because it creates a controlled environment for the puzzles that keeps you from overthinking things, but also has the bombs regenerate, making it super forgiving. This could be someone's first Zelda game. It could take them once or 10 times before they really understand how bomb puzzles work. So letting them get a grip on the fundamentals before giving them a resource to conserve saves a lot of frustration. And I tell you, when I finally got the bomb bag, I was really excited. After the regulation, it's a great feeling to be able to just pull bombs out whenever you want. And since the dungeon circles around, you can use them to finally get back at some of the enemies giving you a hard time earlier. Yeah, that's such a cool animation. I love how the eye explodes. In fact, everything explodes in this dungeon. The Beamos statues, the Armos, the Dodongos, they really spell it out for you. How do you think we fight the boss? You throw bombs at him. Unlike in previous games, we don't have to deal with the same music in every dungeon anymore. In Ocarina, Koji Kondo gave every area its own unique theme to add character. Dodongo's music is all eerie and Aphex Twin sounding. The fact that Kondo can go from this to upbeat and adventurous or low-key and relaxing really shows off his versatility as a composer. And I love how rooms here are separated by these black voids. Just like the Lost Woods, it creates a sense of tension every time you move forward towards something new. Mixed with the music, it's a perfect feeling. But this is also the first dungeon where you really have to move heavy objects onto switches. There's several of these in the game and none of them are fun. You gotta push these fucking statues on the fucking switches so that the fucking door will open. I'm never happy when I have to do these. They stink. There's this really shitty one in the water temple that takes 5 hours. They're only ever really interesting when there's something to spruce things up, like needing to make your own block or having to use an object that doesn't seem relevant at first. But just slowly pushing an object onto a switch, like forget about it, knock it off. Cut it out with that shit. It's also here where we run into the first of the dungeon mid-bosses. This one has 2 sets. One where you fight the Rockefellers and another where you fight the royal family of England. They're pretty straightforward. You gotta defend against their attacks and hit them back. But the jumping attack they do is really cool. Just that move alone will filter people because it requires that you have a really solid grasp on the lock-on feature and also have the right shield. This was one of the first mainstream games to have a lock-on camera system, but the whole camera in general still feels great to this day. One of the nicest quality of life elements added to 64 Zelda is being able to quickly turn the camera right behind Link to see straight ahead with just the push of the Z button. It was a bit tricky to get Mario to do this. He was having some issues at the time, but Link pulls it off like it's nothing. Z-targeting lets you lock onto enemies, which makes Link always face in their direction. You don't have to worry anymore about lining yourself up right for the hit. Now you can just think about the spacing and the right time to swing. This freedom allows for them to make some pretty complex enemies like the Stalfos, who make rapid movements that would be unmanageable without a lock-on system. And these lizard fucks are kind of like that. Even though they're jumping behind you all the time, it doesn't feel disorientating because the camera always does a great job of adjusting and keeping things visible without any input from the player. It also has some other uses that are cool, like letting Link talk to people on locations he can't normally reach. It gives the artist more freedom on where they can place NPCs. What's crazy is that the directors actually got the idea of Z-targeting from a play, which just goes to show how you can find inspiration anywhere. One of the more fun facts about development is that they tested out this mechanic with an R-Wing in Kokiri Forest to get it feeling just right for what they wanted. You can actually still access and play this with a Game Shark, and it's pretty fun to mess with. But you might be wondering why the R-Wing is so small. Well, as it turns out, in an interview with Miyamoto, he said Star Fox himself wasn't available, so they had to build a smaller one to fit his replacement.
Have you ever used a sensory deprivation
After
tank?
killing Dodongo and getting the stone, you gotta head to the top of the mountain. But I want to get some more equipment and hearts and play with my bombs a bit. Goron City seems like a good place to look for heart pieces. I mean, we're here anyways, and the music is fantastic, so let's just chill. There's this cool vase in the middle of the city that spins and rotates, and you can throw bombs in to get a heart piece. But in my last playthrough, I was really having trouble with this. Link, these are really valuable. You don't come across them that often. Oh, fuck. I spent a bunch of time trying to find new bombs, but I couldn't find anything. So I thought, oh, fuck it. I guess I'll just get the heart piece later. I'll just continue on. But I couldn't because I didn't have any bombs. I started getting all cocky. Oh, 5 will be enough. I could afford more. It's not like rupees are scarce. But I immediately fucked up all 5 throws and ran out of bombs again. So I went out and farmed for pennies. Hitler would have had a grand old time with me. For my 3rd attempt, I decided to splurge a bit and get 10 bombs. Oh man, I'm going crazy. Look out, gang. Cutting loose over here. Alright, round 3. Let's go. Jesus Christ, the sun's back up. This shit took Link a whole day. That owl we met earlier is waiting for us at the top of the mountain. He must be steaming. This area is actually pretty important because it has the first great fairy fountain. This one gives us magic and lets us charge an attack, but later ones give us spells that are really useful. Din's Fire has this big hitbox and is needed for some puzzles. Pharaoh's Wind lets you set up warp points to return to whenever you want. It's really handy for later dungeons. And Naru's Love lets you be invincible, and for a pretty fucking long time too. Normally when I have a resource like magic, I tend to want to be a little bit more on the conservative side and not use it unless I have to. But Pharaoh's Wind especially is so useful that it kind of bypasses that urge. I love the design of these fairies too. In previous Zelda games they're a little generic, but here they're these giant chicks that do this shrieking laugh when they show up. Kind of scary as a kid. You're not really sure if they're friendly or not. Everything about the way they pose to how they're framed by the camera gives them this mysterious otherworldly quality, which is also emphasized by the rooms they're in and the whimsical music. It feels like you're visiting some place you don't belong in, which is so much cooler than just some chick with a wand. At this point, it's crazy. You can go right to the 3rd stone, but Hyrule Castle really opens up after getting bombs and has a couple of heart pieces and upgrades available. There's also this mask trading side quest. This can be kind of boring unless you like going around looking for people, but the real fun comes from getting to wear new masks and see how NPCs react to you. There's actually a lot of extra dialogue for these, it's cool, but trying to keep that from getting out of control is also probably why Link can't wear them as an adult, aside from the insecurity. I think all the minigames here are fun. One of the toughest is the shooting gallery, but that's mainly just because of the controls. Aiming in this game is pretty wonky in general. The N64 joystick isn't that sensitive compared to modern controllers, so the aiming was made real stiff to compensate. But most of these sticks have been worn down as shit because Nintendo couldn't afford to lube them up outside of Japan. So most controllers won't even give you the full range of motion anymore. I had to get this special replacement stick by Kirch Bent, which works great, but geez, what a hassle, just to play Zelda. There was a remake for this game on 3DS which uses gyro controls to shoot, and it feels great in comparison, but I guess I'm a bit of a purist, so I stick with the original. Besides, after finishing this minigame, we get more space for ammo, so I have a lot more room for mistakes. My favorite minigame here, though, is definitely Bomb Shoot Bowling. It's got some great prizes like a heart piece and an upgrade for our bomb bag. I always entertain the thought of the clerk here having to work another shift after this as a bartender somewhere, and might pour you a Chateau Romani on the house if you're a regular. I like the fact that she's always sleeping at first when you come in, and almost forgets to let you know what prize is in play. It gives her some personality. It doesn't feel like just some customer service robot selling you shit like most NPCs in games. In fact, most Hylians are cool. This guy's all casual. He's leaning back and has a tattoo. There's even this other guy who's itchy. Hyrule Castle is such a comfy place and it brightens up the game a lot, even at night. Notice how some of the houses still have their lights on, like they're working an all-nighter. I also love how there's this guy here just looking out of his window on the upper floor, waiting for the sun to rise. I love a good sunrise. It's almost like a fourth wall kind of joke about how time doesn't pass in the game when you're visiting a town. He looks like he might be one of the twin jugglers who are always yucking it up in the daytime. So maybe his brother fell asleep and he's feeling a little melancholic not having someone to riff with, and is forced to find a new sense of purpose in life. I love how there's no music at night. It closes the distance between the player and themselves and the game as well. Just the sound of the breeze and the barking dogs. Dogs will follow you around too if you get near them, and you can use this to get a heart piece from this woman who lost her dog. She named it Richard like it's a person. That's so cute. I bet she puts sweaters on it. I bet she puts Deku Nut butter on her pussy and has Richard lick it off. Our last stone is in Zoros Domain, but first we have to go through Zora's River. At this point, I'm noticing how nice the pacing is in this game. Hyrule Field doesn't have many enemies unless it's nighttime, so these segments where you can make your way down a path and deal with a couple enemies before arriving in a new town work great. Death Mountain also did this for Goron City. It gives you some action and... wait, hold on. Okay. It gives you some action and areas to explore before having things settle in a new town where you solve problems by playing songs and catching fish. All while NPCs build up the dungeon and dialogue talking about how scary it is or the problem it's causing for them. Just gives us as much motivation as possible before having us actually jump into the action of it. Zora's Domain is so cool. I don't know if the effect on the wall is steam or reflection or more water, but I really like the effect. Zoras in general are really cool. They never go like, oh my god, look at me, I'm a fish. They just act like anybody else and you can play mini games with them. The quest in this area has you getting the only mandatory bottle in the game and teaches you how to use it. You gotta show this little girl's letter to her dad to let everyone know that she's inside this big fish that they all love called Jabu Jabu. So you also have to use the bottle to catch a smaller fish and then give it to the big fish so that you can go get her back. For some reason the Zora are selling fish for like 30 rupees, but you can just get one right outside the shop for free. It's like paying for flies in Africa. As a kid, I always freaked out by the notion of being in here and doing some internal damage to Jabu's organs while fighting enemies, or the fact there even were enemies in here in the first place, like electric jellyfish and dangling tentacles you gotta dismember. And Jabu Jabu himself doesn't say a word about this. In fact, he doesn't talk the whole game. Does he know that Zoras worship him? Does he even know his own name? Is he retarded? In any case, the Princess Ruto is inside of this befuddlement. We gotta go looking for the last stone together because she lost the fucking thing. This is the only dungeon where we have a companion that we can interact and solve puzzles with. Mainly gotta use her weight to hold down switches and pry open blocked doors. Link can throw her at enemies too, and she's fine with it. She doesn't have a health meter or anything, but she will wear on your patience meter unless you're one of those really cool guys who wants their face smushed under the tits of that chick from the AT&T commercials. Boy, I'll tell you, she'll berate you and tell you that the jellyfish and enemy music are totally fine and to just go away, but you have to ignore what she says and keep talking to make things work. Totally counterintuitive, just like in real life. If she ends up in a body of water, by the way, she just drowns. You think she would thrive in that environment, but no, she totally shits the bed in that regard. This dungeon does a great job of easing you into more non-linear thinking. It's still a straightforward dungeon with little noise to distract you, but knowing where to go next is something you have to think about yourself now. There's been this subtle progression from Navi flat out telling you where to go in the Deku Tree, to having more visual indicators in the Dongos, to not even giving you any real feedback when something new opens up in Jabu Jabu. You can't blame Navi though, I don't think she's been in this situation before, so it all comes down to intuition. In this room, there's several doors blocked off by these pulsating flesh things, and they don't go away until you fight a tentacle of the same color. You go through this process twice before fighting a green one, and you have to start thinking, well, There wasn't any green stuff blocking anything in this room, but one of those holes in the earlier room, that had like a green thing blocking it. I bet they were connected in some way. I should go check it out. If this were designed like the dongos, they might have cut to the tentacle exploding to point you where to go more directly, but not here. The training wheels have come off. We get the boomerang in this dungeon after beating one of the tentacles.
I am black. I am gay. I am disabled.
What a cool item. It goes out and comes right back, unlike my dad, and he can stun enemies, and it's the only way to kill jellyfish. It's comforting to have a projectile weapon without having to worry about ammo. The best feature of this thing is its ability to bring items to you like this. That's a skulltula coin, and they're actually pretty useful. In Ocarina, there's these spiders thrown around the world, and you can get goodies from collecting their tokens. But it's not always straightforward. Some get blocked off by needing the boomerang or bombs, which means you need to backtrack to old dungeons if you want to get all of them. You can sequence break and get some skulltulas a little early if you really believe in yourself, but it can be tricky. Like, look at this. It's like watching Tony Hawk do the 900 for the first time.
900! 900! Oh!
I was going to get taken out and taken to the hospital. So be it, you know, it was worth the effort.
They all wanted to see him make it as much as he wanted to make it.
9, 9, 9, 9. Are you kidding me? Yeah, look at this!
You really want to get a couple of these for rewards though, especially the adult's wallet, which lets you hold twice as many rupees and smells like cigarettes. You can probably make do with the 99 limit, but it's a huge pain in the ass, especially for buying beans. So it's nice that this is the easiest reward to get of all of them. I have to wonder though, if this is the adult's wallet, does that mean Link was carrying around the child's wallet? Does it have Bart Simpson on the front? Little thing on the inside to put his Fuddruckers card? Fucking Legoland driver's license? Oh. Fuck. Sorry, fish. I'd love that they cut to him outside going, oh, every once in a while, but nah, he doesn't care. He's just thinking about seaweed and coral. Usually the spiritual stones are given to Link as a gift, but this last one is actually inside of the dungeon itself. I guess it got swallowed along with Helga from Hey Arnold. But hey, look, we found it. This one's really cool because it's blue. Link knows at this point he has to get all his spiritual stones, and this is one of them. It's the last one. You can just grab it and go. I don't know why he lets Rudo have it, but it starts up the mini boss. This guy's harder than the boss with how he runs away from you. It's pretty agonizing. You're barely faster than him, but it doesn't allow you to follow your instincts and cut corners because you'll get all sliced up. But you can cheese it if you either let yourself get hit or whack him with the boomerang when he's right in front of you, and so he'll turn around and you can fuck him in the ass. Link has to find Rudo now, but without her being around yelling at you, it actually lets you appreciate how cool the dungeon is. All the green fog representing the gases. I love how the floor will pulsate, and the doors too. The way they animate it, gross sounds, it's just awesome. The whole dungeon really shows off the game's lighting effects well too. I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot more hands on deck with this area. It feels like almost every room has a cool and unique thing to look at. I also love how we hang out in the place that seems brand new, only for the platform to fall and reveal that we're actually in a much earlier room and have completed the path to a new door. You don't have Rudo anymore to hold the button down, so you need to use these wood crates over here to get the job done. I still can't believe that's how you solve it. There's something really just like naturally intuitive about it, but if you play a lot of games, you probably tried solving puzzles in a similar way only for the game not to count it or consider it a real solution. The boss here is also great. It's simple Zelda shit where you just spam him with the new item you got until you win, but the presentation is like, it's amazing. The way it rises out of the ground and slowly reveals more of its form, separating parts of itself for defense while trying to shoot you with electricity. It feels like an actual living thing trying to defend itself. It has the coolest death animation in the game too. We save Rudo, but she's not very grateful and wants to do her whole shtick. She gives us a stone, but it's a bit late because Ganon's already dropped his debut. On the bright side though, we get the Song of Time and a new Ocarina. The song has a lot of plot relevance, but it's pretty lame in game. It just moves some blocks every once in a while. And I really don't get why Link threw away Saria's Ocarina. I mean, maybe it's like just a me thing, but it bothers me. It was made of wood. It looked pretty high quality, but he's just gonna toss it because this one's blue? It looks like some plastic piece of shit that weighs a gram. But whatever, some pretty important stuff just happened, so I'm gonna put these stones in the Temple of Time and get the Master Sword. Nah, I'm just joshing ya. I want to give this guy my cool hat because for some reason people won't take me seriously when I wear it, and trading in this mask gets me something kind of fun. See, there's these little gossip stones around Hyrule that tell you the time, but if you complete the mask trading side quest, you get access to an extra feature of them with a special mask called the Mask of Truth. Now gossip stones will give you some fun tidbits about the world, and even some messages from the devs. They say the real Zelda players use the hold method for Z targeting. Yeah, so if you play with that on-off shit, Miyamoto's not even gonna look in your direction. There's a couple extra masks you can wear now too that give NPCs some new dialogues, but it's mainly just for fun. Oh my god, Link, what are you, the Prime Minister of Canada? Take that shit off, somebody's gonna write a twitlonger about you. You'll never be allowed at the Guilty Gear bi-weeklies ever again. What if I told you we're not even halfway done? After putting the stones here, it's time to get the Master Sword. It does double the damage like in Link to the Past, which is sweet, but it also puts Link under for 7 years until he reaches his late teens. This version of Link is shown in the title screen, so I don't know if this is like supposed to be a surprise for the player, but it's cool whether you see it coming or not. My first time playing this, I was so fucking excited waiting for this cutscene to end with this old guy so I could hear what he sounded like. All this happened because Link is too young and has to be older to fight Ganon. Now you may be playing this and being like, well, you know, I'm 38. All I have to do is press the B button at the right times. Link can handle it as a kid, but that's just the way the story is told in this game. The rainy cutscene establishes that young Link couldn't even touch Ganon, so when he rides off on his solid black Gerudo stallion, it shows a close-up of Link like, damn, that was just like in my dream, except I didn't get my shit pushed out. Ganon is just on another level, and it shows that the unfortunate but only hopeful way to deal with this guy is to have Link fight him when he's older and stronger. I think that's how the whole prophecy works. I'm not gonna look that shit up. And I wouldn't spend too much time thinking about who changed Link into his new clothes as he grew older into his late teenage years as he slept, or if he pissed and shit himself. All the cum. The world has really gotten fucked up in the past 7 years. Hyrule Castle used to have so much energy, but now it's got all these redeads everywhere. It's crazy. When you're a little kid and experience this part for the first time right after playing a good Super Mario World sesh, it's just, you know, something you really wouldn't expect to see. These might be the most fucked up but cool enemies I've ever seen in an E-rated game. Canonically, they can't see anything, so if you tiptoe by the redead, they won't notice you at all, which is real cool. It's almost like they operate on fear like a shark. They'll freeze you in place with their loud scream if you're near them and walk towards you slowly. They attack by eating you, so you gotta mash the controller to escape. And they're cannibals too. If you kill one while another is around, they'll walk towards it and eat it themselves until the redead finally fades away. Either that or they're doing some kind of prayer, but yeah, you know, like I said, they're blind, they can't see. They're amazing at playing the piano. Usually when enemies die in Zelda games, they explode or disappear in some way, but the redeads are different. They just lay there and it's super off-putting. You wonder if Link actually killed a guy or if they're somehow gonna get up again, and even to this day, it still kind of gives me the creeps. It's not all bad though. At least the guard in the pot house is doing well for himself because he's living out his dream of collecting ghosts. There's some big Poes you can find in Hyrule Field and bring back to him for some money and eventually a bottle. Strangely though, with how shitty the castle is, Hyrule Field is really peaceful in comparison, because all the skeletons are gone. As a kid, it's like Thriller, but as an adult, for some reason, they're not interested anymore. The idea is that they've grown up and have become Stalfos and moved to the temples, but it really sums up how things have changed. You're not completely on your own, though. This new character, Sheik, shows up to let us know that we have to go get the hook shot to get to the first temple. But at this point, I just had to turn the game off because I had homework and like all these big guys in the forest and the redeads were really freaking me out. It took me 10 years to beat this game. I shot Seaman before I saw the Spirit Temple. This dead guy in the graveyard has the hook shot, and you have to win it from him in this race or you'll look real stupid later on. This replaces the boomerang in that you can use it to get new items, but it also lets you fling yourself to new areas. This place is cool. It's got this space-time continuum thing with Brentalfloss here. That'll come back later. Hyrule Castle is definitely the worst hit, but the whole world is suffering in some way. Longlawn Ranch looks fine at first. Like, look at that. The sun's up. The house doesn't have any people in it, though. Link is being all creepy, looking for Malon's socks. The ranch is no longer run by that cool fat guy we met before. Now it's his self-sucked brother who's a real dickhead to the horses and wants to give the one we met as a kid to Ganon. Because he's such a cunt, it feels really good to outdo him in a set of races. They play it up well, too. After beating him, he gets really salty and wants a double or nothing rematch. But I love how after winning again, they take it a step further by having him lock you in so you can't leave with the horse you just won. It not only teaches you how to jump hurdles, but it further allows you to blow this guy the fuck out in a way that he really can't recover from. I think you can get Epona whenever you want, but it feels right to start here. Instead of going to clean up entire cities, it makes sense to start small first and work our way up to eventually beat Ganon. There's something kind of cool about this place people don't really talk about, but you can come back here afterwards to do an obstacle course with Malon, and if you do well enough, she'll send Amy Schumer to do a private stand-up show at your house. My house is kind of fucked though. Kokiri Forest is full of Deku cunts firing spitballs and scary 9-foot-tall pigs that scream and charge at you. And on top of all that, Saria's also gone. On our way of trying to find her, we also have to deal with Mido again. God, he's such a cock. The way he walks, they knew what they were doing. Look at him. It's obvious at this point that we have to head back to where we got Saria's song 7 years ago. Yeah, remember that? But oh shit, the lesbian's here. Time for my dick to get soft. And now she's teaching me songs too. Chic songs let you teleport around, and it's very convenient compared to dealing with the shortcuts in the Lost Woods. When you have all of them, you can teleport around the whole world easily. It's real nice. You know, I don't think there's one Ocarina song that anyone dislikes. They all fit what they represent. A Minute of Forest sounds like picking berries off a bush during a sunrise, and Prelude of Light sounds like you're uncircumcised but also 8 years old, so you don't really know the power you possess. The Forest Temple is amazing, it really shakes things up. Previously, dungeons have been pretty straightforward. There's a simple linear path the whole way through, and any extra rooms are immediate dead ends with some guys selling nuts or pots to break, which means every challenge is self-contained. Sometimes you'll need an item to solve a certain puzzle, or it could be one of those things where you have to kill all the enemies in the room to continue. But now in the Forest Temple, things are a lot more open. You can go down several paths right away, and they often branch out further or wrap around to previous areas. And now I'm needing to manage keys, which I was really not ready for. I didn't even know how to use a key in real life at this time. You had to put in the whole right side up and turn it, and you had to jiggle it around. The keys are contributing a lot to what organizes these dungeons though. Despite how open things seem at first, the Forest Temple still has a very linear path, and the game is giving you feedback constantly on what you should do next. The places you have to access at first are limited, but as you get keys, you can unlock doors and access new places. But if you come to a locked door with no keys, you know you have to go back and explore some previous areas to find what you missed. And as you go through the dungeon, you'll be presented with objects that clearly are there for you to use the dungeon item on. So when you finally get it, you already know where to head back to. I talked about how in Jabu Jabu, the game stopped directly telling you where to go and forced you to start taking some mental notes. And these temples with their key management are really when that skill becomes important. You now need to consider and fully understand the layout of these temples if you want to complete them. At this point, you're not thinking about how to use an item to open a door. That's basically second nature. You're thinking instead about how to access more parts of the dungeon so that you can eventually get the dungeon item and the boss key and open up the big boss door and fight the boss. The focus on unlocking doors means there's a lot of doors in dungeons from here on out too, and Link is a real sweet guy, always shutting the door gently after opening them. He's very polite about it. I'm surprised he doesn't go around slamming all the doors like, yeah, fuck you, Ganon. Some doors are real cool. They'll open automatically like Link is stepping into Ralph's. The inevitability of hitting dead ends and needing to backtrack could become a bit tedious if exploring the dungeon was a pain, but the first 3 temples revolve around central hubs, so even when you reach a locked door, you never get completely discouraged since backtracking is quick and simple. And that's important. That lack of commitment keeps these dungeons friendly and encourages you to explore and try new things. Even when I did get lost a bit here back in the day, I never really minded because the Forest Temple is just so cool. In fact, I wish this place was real. I'm gonna go into architecture and build a replica of the Forest Temple out in the Amazon, and I'm never telling anyone about it. I'm gonna wait for some white guy to stumble upon it and blow a thick load in his khaki shorts. Even though it's called the Forest Temple, it's incredibly diverse visually. You're not just looking at trees. I love this room where it's all twisted up. There's no other area like it in the game. I imagine this took a bit of time to implement too, so it's crazy the amount of restraint to just use it in this one room where it was appropriate. The whole experience of playing through this shit is like going through a psychedelic wonderland, but it's balanced out by areas like this courtyard with the open sky or the well, which are very grounded in comparison. It feels like people used to visit here long ago and have picnics and socialize. I feel like that's intentional considering a lot of the enemies in this dungeon are some kind of ghost or skeleton. It makes it feel like it has a history. Koji Kondo and all the artists deserve props, but the sound effects here add just the right amount of ambience to really bring the whole thing together. Yoji Ingagaki and Takuya Maekawa put sounds in the game that they really didn't even have to. Of course it'd be a little unnatural if the sword didn't make any noise, but the ambient nature sounds in the nighttime sections or the sound of Link's footsteps changing depending on the terrain he's walking on are amazing. I didn't even notice this until I was recording this footage like yesterday. It was when Link was walking on the polished concrete or whatever and then the carpet. The fact that I didn't notice this for so long means that it was so natural that it just became invisible. Just another thing going towards my immersion. With all of the thought that was put into everything, such a concept must have had to been pitched and discussed from Miyamoto to the sound designers when he said,
Inagaki, make Link's footsteps different on the Capitol.
The bow and arrow is the dungeon item here.
Capitol sounds different.
It's kind of like the slingshot we got in the Deku tree. But unlike other dungeons where the item is basically just another key, the Forest Temple does a bit more with the bow. I like this room especially where you have to use your intuition to line up an arrow so that it goes through the flame. With arrows you can shoot eye switches, and some of them in the Forest Temple do crazy things like having whole rooms change their geometry. We can make that disorientated twisting room more normal, which allows us to check out new rooms and makes the dungeon all the more dynamic. It does feel a bit strange though. We were able to activate these as a kid with our slingshot, but Link is kind of weird with the items he doesn't want to use anymore. Like, ew, the slingshot? That's gay. Oh, but those Deku nuts? Yeah, they're staying. The first person aiming has a lot of uses in the game though, so I don't mind them revolving another dungeon around it. It's interesting actually, originally the whole game was supposed to be in first person, like when you go into the slingshot or the bow and arrow. Miyamoto wanted you being able to take in all of Hyrule Field without Link's head getting in the way, and it also would have saved on some polygons. But Yoshiaki Koizumi hated the idea so much that he completely ignored the suggestion. Not only that, but Koizumi was designing Link's 3D model, and being informed that it wasn't even going to be seen most of the time must have really pissed him off. Shiggy came around though after Link's model was completely finished, and he really liked how it looked. But the first person idea is still alive with the shooting and this mode where you can look around. It adds a lot to the game. You know, I've been criticizing Miyamoto a bit, but that kind of out-of-the-box thinking is really what makes him such an important guy in the industry. That willingness to just completely throw out what worked previously in pursuit of new ideas to explore is a mentality I think people could learn a lot from. And while going all first person didn't work out for Zelda, it ended up working perfectly for Metroid. The mini-boss formula is mixed up here with the pose. There's 4 of them, and throughout the process of the dungeon, you'll have to solve a puzzle before a fight. Unfortunately, they're not really all that fun. They're always disappearing because they're shy and are pretty derivative of normal pose. Aside from the last one, which is really unique, you gotta take advantage of the first-person aiming. Fuck my ass! You gotta take advantage of the first-person aiming to find the real ghost. It's cool. The whole dungeon is cool. Look at how cool Link is. The game doesn't play around anymore, and you fight some pretty mean enemies in here. The wall masters are real interesting. If they catch you, they take you back to the beginning of the dungeon, but when you kill them, they often drop money, and a lot of it too. I don't know, maybe they rob people. The Stalfos here are definitely the most complicated enemy in the game. Even at early points in development, you can see Stalfos were there. I imagine they were built up early to test the game's melee combat interactions, especially with how sophisticated the AI is. No other enemy in the game has this much depth to it. Even these Darknut guys later on pale in comparison. They're pretty predictable since you can bait them into attacking you just by getting close to them. So they have to make them seem more intimidating by giving them super armor and heavier hitting attacks and making them all big. In contrast, Stalfos are fun because of how much they love to play defense. There's definitely still a surefire way to make them attack you, but it's definitely not as obvious as just approaching them. If they give you trouble though, you can always gain an advantage with Deku Nuts to freeze them, and they'll even drop them occasionally as a hint. The game actually does a lot with these item drops. Instead of just being a random chance of getting something, there's some slight manipulation to help push you along. Pots and enemies can have more hearts if you're running low on them. People call these flex drops. Some pots even have hard-coded items guaranteed to come out, like magic or arrows. They're there to make sure you don't need to backtrack to get resources, but when I'm in a crummy mood, I like to pretend that luck was just on my side instead of the game telling me, hey, you're gonna be using Din's fire soon. I love the boss fight here. I love that it has nothing to do with leaves or trees or wood or anything. God, that really would have fucking pissed me off. The boss itself is mainly target practice with the bow, but the second half really takes you for a spin. You have to ping-pong the attacks back and forth, and as it goes on, the pace gets faster and faster until he chokes and you get to slice him up. Hey, we found Saria. Turns out she was a forest sage, and for some reason she starts getting credit for my work. You and Saria. Saria didn't do anything. I'm the one with the controller. She just lifted her arms a bit. Oh, sorry about that, Link, but it's only gonna get worse. The Deku Tree Sprout is born and reveals to us that we were adopted. We were never a Kokiri, and our mom was badly injured and dropped us off here and died soon after. He's really excited to share this information. Look at how happy he is. Didn't even say who the dad was. Jesus, I wonder if Link has a SoundCloud. Oh shit, he does. After the Forest Temple, the game opens up a lot. Sheik lets us go back in time, so now we're basically free to do whatever we want as an adult or a child. When Link goes back to being a kid, I always wonder if he remembers what it's like to be a teenager. He's not pubescent anymore, but does he still like adult things? Does he still like King of the Hill? There's a lot of possibilities when you let the player move back and forth through time, and Ocarina does some fun things with the idea. The time mechanics aren't always consistent with each other, but I don't think it's a big deal. To me, it's more important that you're always given fun ways to interact with the world and be able to influence it as a time traveler. If anything, I wish there was some more side content that took advantage of the time traveling, but a lot of them are restricted to either Child Link or Adult Link purely, which is sad because stuff like the Scarecrow and the bean planting side quests are a lot more unique. As a child, there's soil around the world that you can plant beans in that'll grow into plants in the future, and these will let you ride around the world easier and give you access to some heart pieces and skulltulas. This is really what I'm talking about. It's very satisfying to do something as Child Link that allows us to directly benefit from it in the future. It's almost like we're rigging the world in our favor a bit and makes Link's ability to time travel feel like a real superpower. I think being able to move through time adds to the environmental storytelling as well. When you run around Hyrule as a kid, you get a reference for how harmonious and lively the world should be. This is what you're trying to slowly return the world to through beating temples in the future, and it really emphasizes the goal a lot. It's also just fun to see characters grow older as well, seeing how people can change in 7 years. Even small NPCs like this guy at the fishing pond who loses his hair over the time gap and starts wearing a hat, and you can even snatch it from him, which is a cool little Easter egg. Speaking of that, fishing is really fun in this game. If you get a big fish as a kid, you can get a heart piece, and if you get a bigger fish as an adult, you get the golden scale, which lets you dive deeper and get a heart piece. But it's not really about that. It's all about the mood and the enjoyment of fishing. Kakariko Village music will play in the back as if they know it's the coziest song. And I know Link is having a much harder time here than he was at beating the Forest Temple, but that's okay. No one's taught Link how to fish except for this old boomer, and Link is too autistic to get his sarcastic jokes. He just skips all the advice too. But he doesn't care, he's still having a great time. He could just keep going forever. There's so many cool details in this minigame, like they didn't have to have those dirt physics when the fish is like flopping around, but they did anyways, just for you. They could have just had the poor bastard clip through the floor like every other game at the time and no one would have minded, but they put in the effort. You can tell the people who made this area love fishing. Time still passes while playing here too, so you can really feel like an asshole knowing that Ganon's only gaining more control while you jerk your dick trying to catch the biggest fish. Aw, don't worry about it, Link. It happens to everyone. See, one time I left the bowling alley and I forgot I still had my shoes on. No story here, I just have them. I'm wearing them right now. If you want to just get through the game, it becomes incredibly fast-paced from here on out until the end. You can just go to the Fire Temple now, and the only thing really stopping you is needing to get a red tunic from this guy so you can walk on lava. That's what's so cool about this game. The pace is really up to you. You can stop and take things in and explore a bit, or just go from temple to temple, almost like speed reading a book. I also love how as an adult, you can still revisit Dodongo's Cavern on your way to Death Mountain, and even get a skulltula from it. But it's kind of sad that there aren't any friendly Gorons hanging out here after we solve their big lizard problem. Like, it's established that this is where all the dank rocks are, but they never hang out here at all. Sometimes Gorons will roll down the mountain, and I always imagine that they're heading to Dodongo's to get some rocks like it's their in and out. This game has a couple extra options for equipment, which is real fun. As a kid, you can use 2 different shields that defend him in different ways, and as an adult, there's 2 optional weapons to replace the Master Sword, the Giant's Knife and the Bigoron Sword. Getting the Giant's Knife is real exciting. It's a new...
Oh, shit.
The Bigoron Sword is twice as strong as the Master Sword and has twice the reach. Bosses get really messed up by it. You can't use your shield though because the sword is so big. Getting it involves a lengthy side quest where you have to run around and get materials to fix Bigoron's itchy eyes. It's pretty fun, except for this part where this little girl shows up telling me that the guy I was trying to bring medicine to fucking died alone in the forest and that I'm going to die in the same way. That really put a damper on the whole thing. The reason we can't chill with all the cool Gorons at Dodongo's is because they're all being held as prisoners here in the Fire Temple by this big dragon. Seems like every time we come here, they always have some reptile problem. This place has a cool gimmick of saving them all one at a time. It's how you get keys, and there's a lot of moments where you see one locked up but can't actually free them until you approach the room from another angle. It's really cute how they're all curled up like armadillos in distress. It's not mandatory to talk to them after you open their cell, you can just ignore them, but I don't have the heart to do that. Something about the way they escape with the nice music, it really brightens my day up. I can't resist. There's an infamous fun fact about this dungeon's soundtrack getting the 4Kids remaster. I'm recording this game on the original version, which has some chanting in it to add some ambience. Koji Kondo made this game with sounds from a sample CD, and he thought the chants sounded super cool, so he used them. It turns out that the chants are actually Islamic though, which goes against Nintendo's whole thing of not having religious stuff in games. Eventually the music got replaced with a version without chanting, and I think I prefer this version actually, just because the vocals can get a bit repetitive. But the music isn't the only thing they changed. They also removed some symbols from these blocks and the mirror shield later in the game, because they also had Islamic shit on them. As far as I know, no one ever really got offended in the first place, so they were being real Anthony Birches about it. And speaking of that, aesthetically, the Forest Temple totally fucks the Fire Temple's wife, but it still has its own thing going for it. In terms of movement, it's definitely the most demanding in the whole game. There's a couple rooms where you have to make your way to chests before time runs out, and the window is actually pretty tight. There's also a lot of heights. This might be the dungeon with the most vertical scale to it aside from the Deku Tree. This place has falls so large you can end up 2 floors below. Link sure does let it all out when he jumps off of stuff. Some people might give him a hard time about this because, you know, he's supposed to have the Triforce of Courage. But think about it. In a way, it's more courageous to be scared of doing something but going through with it anyways, rather than trying to be fearless. At the end of the day, he still makes the jump, so it doesn't really matter. What would be really pathetic is if he screamed but didn't jump. Now that'd be some real pussy-ass shit. Fuck, relax, Link. Ganon's not here. It's just Splash Mountain. I love the sequence when you're running away from the fire. At first it's simple, you gotta jump across different platforms. But what makes it one of my favorite puzzles in the game is making your way to this higher door over here. Normally you could jump to it, but the firewall chasing you doesn't give you enough time. So you have to jump on these pillars which allow the wall to go under you. I love the simplicity of this. It doesn't require a fancy item or in-game knowledge, it's just pure spatial awareness. It's also cool that it's a puzzle that can only really work in 3D. It doesn't even play the jingle when you figure it out. It's like they're like, yeah, whatever, it's no big deal. This hammer is used for a couple puzzles in the dungeon and it has like 2 things in the overworld that aren't even required, and that's it. I mean, they try their best to make it cool. You can use it as a weapon and it does more damage than the sword, but it also has a lot of recovery frames after using it, so anything with super armor is going to counter you. It just feels like another key we need to get through the Fire Temple rather than a brand new tool that'll be useful for the whole adventure. Even for the boss, using the hammer feels kind of tacked on. They could have just cut it out and had me go right to slashing its head and nothing would have really changed. It really needed some more utility because it pretty much fucks off for the rest of the game until we get to Ganon's house. Putting in enemies that are only weak to it would feel kind of cheap though. Maybe it could have given you some more options for already existing enemies. Like maybe if you're in a room with a wall master and use the Megaton hammer, the Quake could make it fall down and be vulnerable to an attack. It's kind of useful against enemies in the Fire Temple, but Deku Notes work just as well for these slugs, and they're not even difficult to deal with in the first place. I always remember the boulders and the falls being more advantageous than enemies were. There's no Stalfos or anything, it's mainly just stuff that's on fire and some door mimics for gags here and there. These guys though are cool. These are called like-likes. Now if you ask me, there's nothing to like about an enemy that eats your shield and makes you go and buy a new one, but the animations on them are really cool. They have a really neat effect with this texture constantly moving up, and the way they extend to try and get you. The movement reminds me a bit of a bloodworm. It's great. You know they mean business even if they can't move around much. Darunia is revealed to be the sage after playing whack-a-mole with the dragon. Not a huge surprise, he's the only Goron that really matters. Besides Big Goron, of course, he made us that really cool sword, but I don't think he'd fit in the sage room. By the way, I learned a new song, check it out. Yeah, that's something not a lot of people get into with this game. You can hold A and B to flatten sharp notes on the ocarina, and the analog stick can be used to pitch bend up 2 semitones as well as add vibrato. These modifications allow you to play any chromatic note on the ocarina, which means as long as you can transcribe any melody down to have it fit in the range, you can literally play anything. If you've been paying attention, you can tell that things are kind of following the same progression as when we were a kid. You start off at Kokiri Forest, then you go to Death Mountain, and now we're at Zoros. But unlike the others, which have more subtle differences, Zoros Domain is totally fucked up and frozen, and the pattern is further broken up when we enter the Ice Cavern. This place isn't a temple, it's a lot more like the child dungeons. It's very linear and there's no key management. Instead you have to get and carry around blue fire in bottles to melt red ice, and it's introduced in a cool way. King Zora and the shop are covered in this stupid shit and they're real useful, so you're already anxious to figure out how to solve the problem. While that's running in your head, you go to the ice cavern and see more of the red ice all over the place. So by the time you actually get the blue fire, it's clear what you need to use it for. They don't even need to give any text for this, it should just say Messing with the fire is cool, but it becomes obvious why carrying stuff in bottles isn't normally required for progression. You already have to go into your inventory enough in this game, and using the bottles always involves lengthy animations that kind of kill the flow. But luckily, I have a lot of bottles because I got all the ghosts, so I don't have to backtrack and keep refilling every time I come across some red shit and have to melt it with my blue shit. The cutscene plays every time he refills, and it's long too. They really go through the whole thing. Puts a cork on it. Link doesn't mind getting the fire at all though. Look at how happy he is. I don't think Link has ever been that happy doing anything else. This is his favorite dungeon. And really, I can't blame him. I'm complaining about nothing really. This is the only place bottle puzzles are really taken seriously, and it's a short area, so the tediousness doesn't really have time to take effect and get on your nerves like it would in a full temple. So instead, it's just a neat little change of pace. There's also this cute minigame introduced here where you have to collect a series of silver rupees to open up a path. It plays a little toodly-doo sound every time you get one. If you don't get them all, Link can't progress and Ganon will enslave and murder all the civilians. So you better get them all! Haha, wee! They're used a lot in later temples and are mainly just there to get you exploring a room, but they're fun enough. Because this isn't a traditional dungeon, there's no boss here. I think some enemy may have popped up for a second, but I wouldn't know because it vanished immediately. I couldn't really process what it was. I was too focused on how cool the wall is. Look at that transparency layering, isn't that cool? 3D graphics are amazing. They knew this was hot shit because they do close-ups on it when Sheik shows up again to teach us a new teleportation song. It conveniently takes us right to the dried up Lake Hylia, which is nice because this is right where the water temple is. But if you save some red ice, it's worth going back to Zoros so you can unfreeze the king and get the water tunic. Yeah, Sonic. Look, he's even rolling around like how Sonic rolls around. And he's even got like a blue spike coming out of his head like Sonic. You don't need this at all. It just lets us sync with the iron boots we just got while still being able to breathe. If you sync with the other tunics, a timer shows up and Navi has to tell Link that he can't breathe underwater like he's 5 years old. The drought at Lake Hylia is pretty bad, but thankfully we can solve it after we beat the water temple and get our next medallion. Other dungeons are pretty candid about their introduction, but the water temple really kicks it up a notch. You get to rise out slowly from the water as the camera points to the central building in the middle of the temple. It's a great intro to one of my favorite dungeons, and I'm not saying that just to be contrarian. First of all, it just looks cool. I love the texture work on these floor tiles, and the central building in general is real neat. It's a great model, but I also like this block that raises and lets you get access to a secret crevice for a key. This is definitely the water temple. There's water level switches you have to figure out, and waterfalls, and currents are even played with, and there's even little whirlpools that'll suck you up. Everything involving water is basically exhausted here. In fact, I'm even drinking out of my water bottle. Everybody complains about having to pause the game to take the iron boots on and off all the time in the water temple. But you know what? I bet you couldn't do any better. Imagine having to sit down to take off your regular boots, and then you have to put on your iron ones that are really heavy as fast as possible and you're underwater. 50 seconds! The layout really exacerbates the problem. There's a lot of areas like this where you gotta put the iron boots on and sink down and go through a corridor, and then take them off to resurface and do a segment. And some of these are dead ends, which means you'll have to immediately repeat the process to backtrack. This is such an irritation that it's often better to try to get through with a dive just to try and save yourself the hassle. When pausing, there's like a full second of delay before you can interact with the menu too, just to rub salt in the wound. And it really makes me wonder, what's making it take so long? Is it Link? He's the only thing that's 3D here. Everything else on the menu is like Donkey Kong Country 3D. It's not real. So it has to be Link, right? He's the only thing that could be a 3D render. And there's no way it's all sprites. It would never take this long. I just want to put on different boots or reference bars to grind out a song, but Link over here is making it take forever. In the 3DS remake, they put a band-aid on this problem by having the boots be an item that can be assigned to a quick select button instead of equipment like it is here. So you can take them on and off without needing to go into the menu anymore. I get why they weren't like that originally though. Boots are worn. They're equipped. They're active all the time, whereas the items mostly cause some kind of temporary effect when triggered. The only thing that really breaks that are the masks, but they're optional. So it makes total sense to have the boots be something you wear versus something you assign to the C button. The issue is that in the later dungeons, you need to change your kicks constantly, and it really starts to become a drag. It goes to show how consistency isn't everything. The reason systems are organized like this is to make gameplay intuitive, to benefit the player. When consistency becomes irritating, like with the whole iron boots fiasco, you either have to make some kind of hack to get it feeling better, or rethink the whole system, but no one has time for that shit. And you're probably going to end up breaking some other things along the way, so just hack it up. It's best to always be flexible and keep the important goals at the forefront. There's another issue with switching shoes all the time that isn't talked about as much. You meet up with Ruto again at the beginning of this, and she lets you know that there are 3 switches you can use to change the water level. She even guides you to the first one and gets you immediately familiar with the mechanic. It's really central that you understand this shit and how it affects the environment, since it's used all the time to solve puzzles, and it makes the whole dungeon a great brain teaser. But sometimes these switches are a real pain to get to, and since you need to visit them semi-regularly, Pharaoh's Wind is basically required if you want to avoid depression. It's a problem because you might come up with a solution to a puzzle or a way to open a new location that involves changing the water level, but because of this iron boots problem, you need to constantly equip and unequip to get to the switch, and by that 2 to 3 minute trek, you might have completely forgotten about what you wanted to do in the first place. So if you get an idea, you gotta write it on paper or a notepad or something. Oh. I'm gonna get CTE. It's no wonder I have problems remembering shit. Again, I like that the temple is dynamic and changes like this. The progression through the dungeon is just fantastic. At first, the temple is flooded to the top floor, but you can't get access to any area since they require a key or a hookshot upgrade, so you have to drain everything. But when you finally bring the water back up to where you were before and can suddenly start exploring these areas that were once blocked off with your new keys and dungeon item, it's incredibly satisfying. It's Zelda dungeons at their best, but the trek to the switches is the real problem. And they don't even really correlate to what they are on the y-axis. Like, both of these switches are basically on the same ground level, but one makes it half full while the other completely drains it. You couldn't feasibly design it to be intuitive though, because it starts full and you have to drain the water immediately. But if Link tries to play his Ocarina on the floor underwater to trigger the switch, it won't work because bubbles will come out instead of music, so you have to make this compromise. It might make sense to design the central building in a way to house all 3 water level switches, but fuck that. It would probably take way more time than it's worth, and you'd basically have to completely redesign the dungeon to work around it, and you're a Japanese businessman on a deadline in the middle of a recession, and several old people are yelling at you every day. I feel like water switches just always cause some problems in 3D. Like in Aquatic Mine, Knuckles needs to find the Master Emerald shards, but he has the same issue Link has where he can't breathe in the water, so he needs to get this little necklace to be more comfortable. In Ocarina, they try their best to make the switch locations make sense, but in Aquatic Mine, the switch on top drains the water completely, and these two are right next to each other and the water level correlates to a number instead of a position. That convenience makes sense here since the gameplay is more about treasure hunting. You want all the tools available from the start since shards could spawn anywhere and you need to collect them as fast as possible for the point bonuses. It's a cool stage and the music sheds some light into Knuckles' mindset on things. Sometimes he just wants to be able to relax, but his responsibilities get in the way. He also reveals that he doesn't even want to fight enemies, but they just go after him, so he kinda has to. I don't blame him though, these ghosts are a pain in the ass at this point with how they molest you. What's up with that? We're not in Halloween Town anymore, like, can we lose the ghosts? I don't know how Knuckles has the mental fortitude to wrap in his head while this is happening to him and the Emerald radar is going off. Maybe he's just used to it at this point. The game decides after this to break things up with his kart racing minigame, where Tails has to drive to get a mini-disc to Bill Clinton in time before Robotnik can make him surrender the US to the Eggman Empire. I think that's what's going on. It's a bit hard to keep track of the story since everyone's talking over each other and Johnson Yu has his amp turned up to 11.
Don't worry, Mr. President. Everything's under...
Driving itself isn't so bad, it's a fun diversion, but you have to go into this weird drift mode to get around corners and the noise is really obnoxious. Rings also have some utility in letting you boost after collecting enough that— wait, what the fuck? I wonder if Rudo is in the dungeon and can hear the reverberations of Link screaming and gurgling in the water and doing cannonballs. Link just really goes for it. In the beta version of this game, Link would spend 5 minutes dipping his toes in the water so he could get used to the temperature before slowly crawling in while shivering and going, "Ooh, it sure is cold." He has to put on his water wings and his penis gets all small. God, I still can't get over that shit. It's so cool. These dungeons have doors in them like it's somebody's house. Link grabs that doorknob and closes it like, "Hey, when's dinner ready?" That's insane. He never did that on SNES. Of all the mid-bosses in the game, this one is definitely the most detailed. You come into this room that has its own unique look from everything else with this tree in the center. It's not until you see that the door is locked and you turn around that you're faced with a transparent shadowy version of Link. He mirrors all your attacks and will stand on your sword if you try to stab him. As time goes by, he'll slowly shift from translucent to solid and begin getting more aggressive. And after the fight is done, the room fades to something much more fitting for the dungeon. It makes me wonder if the segment is just in Link's head, like he's having a bad trip. The presentation of the fight is top-notch, and it's a fun callback to Zelda 2 where you fought Dark Link for the final boss. It's very cool, but I always wonder why Link has a dark version of himself in the first place. Is he like some YouTube reviewer? Does he review NES games? The fight itself is a little confusing. You'd think it'd be like fighting the Stalfos, just a one-on-one with your sword, no gimmicks. But I can't for the life of me find a consistent way to fight him normally. It seems like you're supposed to fight him without walking on, but it still feels like attacks don't go anywhere. It's like his hurt boxes are only active during his recovery frames or something. If Darkwing pulled out his own Begoron sword, I would have shit myself. No one fights this guy for real. It's always either doing some crazy shit, hitting him with a hammer, or stabbing him with a Begoron sword. It's weird how these items have an effect on him, but others like bombs do nothing. My theory on this is that this fight was probably designed and animated by like 4 people, but all of the work on programming the fight was put on one guy who's from like Osaka. And every day, he clocks in late and clocks out early. It's a long commute to Kyoto, and unlike the others, he has a wife at home waiting anxiously to have sex with him. When you're working on Zelda games, you have to know that millions are going to play it. I bet that puts a lot of pressure on the devs. But not this guy. He looked at his job for the day and went, "Man, right, so what was I working on yesterday? Oh yeah, that water place. Man, kids are gonna love putting on those boots. What's this, Dark Link? Isn't Link the hero? What's so dark about him? Boss?" This is my favorite part of the dungeon, this little Goonies water slide. It's this cozy little linear segment where you can just get some fairies and enjoy the currents while avoiding whirlpools. It's a nice break from the rest of the dungeon's complexity, and it always leaves me feeling refreshed and ready to take things on with my new long shot. Link, what are you doing? More like the hero of taking this time. If Link doesn't wrap this up soon, Mario's gonna be taking a spin around Ruto's dry ovaries. You can reach further places and get goodies with this hookshot upgrade. I like using it to cheat in the second Dampe race. Check out this sick strat. For this dungeon though, it's needed to access a couple areas. It's mixed well with the bow in this puzzle where you have to shoot the eye and then quickly switch to the long shot before time runs out. Oh my god! Link! He doesn't care. It's nice to have this extra range, but the trade-off is that it's slower if you miss a target, which makes it a lot less useful for combat. The boss itself could be used to create some situations that require the extra range, but instead the fight is actually pretty close quarters. You need to use a hook shot to get this orb out of the water, but the long shot upgrade isn't needed for it at all. They could have made a more defensive boss that runs away if you get too close, but is otherwise stationary. Aggressive bosses are usually more fun to fight though, so I can understand why they opted for this instead. Maybe having a mix of the two would have worked a bit better, just something to showcase it a bit more. The water's back now, and if you took some time to plant some beans, you'll be able to ride around and take in all the scenery, rolling by at a blazing 20 frames a second. Yeah, this game is pushing the hardware a little bit. Like, I think a lot about Mario 64. In that game, you go into rooms and see one, like maybe two enemies at a time if you were lucky. They usually be really spread out from one another too, so if they somehow managed to hit me, I'd get extra embarrassed. Models need to be simplified as they move away from the screen, but even then it's not enough. Sprites are often used instead and have their position updated every frame to be parallel to the camera to simulate depth. This is called billboarding, and at the time this technique was used a lot to save polygons. But even with all of that, Mario 64 still only runs at 30 FPS, and Ocarina pushes things way harder in comparison. There's still stuff done to save polygons, don't get me wrong. Like, billboarding is still used on some things like item drops, and a lot of the interiors offer big textures instead of actual models. But they're not fucking around. They'll put several enemies on screen at the same time. In fact, they'll put 5 of them on screen. The draw distance is also really impressive, and there's a lot of ambitious stuff done with the lighting, but it pays the price with the frame rate. It's not even consistently at 20. I noticed some death animations for some enemies have this really expensive particle effect that'll be used, and if you break a bunch of stuff at once with a spin attack, it just chugs. But I think for Zelda, it makes sense to put a bit more emphasis on the presentation rather than the performance. Like this ain't F-Zero. Even though I like the combat, you don't ever really need precision. But it's definitely something to get used to if you're more accustomed to the 8K 144Hz experience on your McMonster machine. After beating the first 3 temples, Navi says we need to check out Kakariko Village, but it's on the other side of the world, so let's call the horse. Man, it's like Joe Biden is playing the Ocarina. Heading back to Kakariko, everything is on fire because this guy called Bongo Bongo was tired of being sealed at the bottom of the well and wanted to wreak some havoc. This is one of my favorite cutscenes. I love the camera work and the dramatic lighting. There's great character animations and a really cool POV shot. And it's funny to just see Sheik get her shit all tossed around. After she gets it together, we're taught the Nocturne of Shadow, which is one of my favorite songs in the game. The next dungeon can be teleported to with our new song, but I just got my ass kicked by some invisible shit, so we gotta get an item to even the playing field. The name drops to the well, and the fact that Bongo burst out of it's given some pretty direct hints to check that shit out as a kid. You know, I wonder if when Link goes back in time, if the optimism comes back as well. Oh, hey Richard. You can actually come here at any time after learning the Song of Storms as an adult from this bald guy, which makes this dungeon a bit tricky to design for, since you have to accommodate for the fact that some kid might be coming in here right after beating the Forest Temple with only a couple of hearts. So to get the item here, you just need to play Zelda's Lullaby to drain water, crawl into the hole and fight a mini-boss, and that's it. You get the Lens of Truth from this, which lets you illuminate things that are invisible. But it's kind of weird. There's a lot of barriers preventing you from doing things out of order in this game. Like, you never need bombs from Dodongos to beat Jabu Jabu, so to make sure you do it in the right order, Zora's River is blocked by boulders. Before the Shadow Temple too, you have to get the forest, fire, and water medallions. But for some reason, there's technically nothing road blocking you if you don't want to get the Lens of Truth. The game just gets really frustrating as you keep bumping into shit. This means you never need to go into the well either, but I don't know why you wouldn't, because it's one of the coolest places in the game. It's mostly totally optional rooms for skulltulas, but I just love hanging out here for the atmosphere. It's full of secret entryways in the walls and the invisible holes you can just fall down. There's all these dangerous enemies and poison water. This place is really intimidating for Child Link. He's still drinking drinking bottled milk and eating applesauce. You also have a boss here, Dead Hand. To start the fight, you have to intentionally get grabbed by one of the hands sticking out. I love when games make you fuck with stuff you don't want to like this. It's also nice in a way because it lets you know what they do before the fight starts. Dead Hand takes a bit to close distance, so you have time to mash out and understand why it's not good to get grabbed. The animations are so sick, the mouth gaping open before he takes a bite, and the textures too. He's all bloody and has this creepy face. Some people might say this is going a bit too far. They'll say like, this is a kid's game.
What the fuck, dude? This is a kid's game.
Yeah,
These maps are
Japanese
so
kids
iconic
game.
and
These guys go through nuclear disasters once a week, okay? They're hardened people. Anyone who thinks that way should just deal with it, because I love this kind of shit as a kid, and it only further adds to the off-putting nature of Kakariko Village. It's a peaceful town full of NPCs and the best song in the game, but it also has a graveyard that has ghosts and zombies and a necrophiliac. It was made by Shika, who seemed to be like some kind of group of death cultists, and they only recently let normal working class people into the village. There's this woman who spends all her time being concerned about these dumb chickens when she's standing next to a well with corpses in it. It's a town kind of like Twin Peaks, where everything has this dreamlike, too good to be true feel to it, but has this underlying darkness that always lingers in the background. I also love the contrast of Kakariko. It gives the game a great feeling of balance. The real kicker though is in the Shadow Temple.
Hidden power, secrets, cover-ups, corruption. You think you know Hyrule? Blink again. I've been governor, a Navy SEAL, a fighter. I've seen things that'll blow your mind. And now I think it's time you saw the whole story.
This place has torture devices and bloodstains all over the floor. This is because back in the day, Hyrule had a civil war, and the Sheikah would use this place as their own Guantanamo to interrogate and torture and kill POWs for Hylians. Compared to previous dungeons, the Shadow Temple is a lot more linear. Instead of one central room with many different sub-areas, you move into new hubs that have only a couple of branches that have keys needed to progress to the next area and so on. It fits really well with this place. As you progress, you go deeper and deeper into the dungeon, making it all the more difficult to turn back. If I had to go to this place IRL, I'd bring a can of panko breadcrumbs. Oh yeah, and a kitchen knife. This place is full of visual trickery, kind of like the well, and you'll need to use the lens of truth to see things clearly. You get the item for this dungeon pretty early on, the hover boots. They're still a bit annoying to manage like the iron boots are, but the linearity means that they never quite get in the way of solving puzzles. It's also a lot less frequent. Plus, unlike the iron boots that just slow you to a crawl, you get to walk on the air with these things and skate around like Link's walking on the ice. It's a real blast. With how serious and dark this place is, the puzzles really need to feel organic and use the environment well, otherwise the immersion will just get ruined. Like this one where you have to stop the marble zone spikes from crushing you. Using the lens of truth to reveal and fight hidden floor masters is another great one. But for some reason, the dungeon often opts for silver rupee collecting, and it just feels kinda out of place. There's these rooms with executioner statues with spinning scythes that'll decapitate Link if he gets too close. Oh yay! The enemies here at least all fit the tone. Redeads and Gibdos and Stalfos and Wallmasters, they're all creepy, but they're also pretty difficult and punishing. We're definitely approaching the end game with this dungeon. Floor Masters are one of the freakiest enemies in this game, and you get fully acquainted with them here. When you kill one of them, they'll split into 3 smaller ones like this and scurry around like spiders. The way they attack is crazy. Most enemies in this game just bonk you or hit you with a sword. It's got, you know, a little cartoony, but these guys just strangle Link, freezing him in place too, which is especially nerve-wracking since they'll eventually grow into full-size floor masters again if you don't kill them in time. It creates a sense of urgency when fighting them that's really exciting. Sometimes the music has this texture in it that sounds a bit like Wallmasters telegraphing themselves. I wonder if that was done on purpose to try and put the player on edge a bit more. It really adds to the atmosphere, and the visuals too. The dungeon really pushes the E rating a lot with all the blood and the creepy enemies and the guillotines. It keeps things spooky, but not in a way that feels too overwhelming for a kid. I really love the graphics in this game in general. Like maybe it's just nostalgia, but the N64's anti-aliasing fuzzes up the pixels in a way that makes me fill in a lot of details in my head. It's almost like an impressionist painting, especially when you play the game on a CRT where things blur together even more. You never really know what the fuck you're looking at. It has a real charm that works best in places like this where that ambiguity really adds to the eeriness. Especially as a kid being more innocent, I couldn't really quite tell what the Redeads were doing to Link exactly, or to each other, but I knew I didn't like it. I feel like if the game was made now with a higher resolution, it really wouldn't be able to fully capture the same feeling. Not to mention the capture card I used to record my playthrough here made the low-lit sections of the game even darker, which I personally think is cool. I don't know though, maybe you're all pissed off right now. I can get it though, early 3D graphics definitely put some people people off. But in some areas, Ocarina of Time still looks really good, and the character designs are all real fun and diverse. You never mistake one NPC for another. They all have some personalities and quirks that come out in their animations, which help distinguish them even further. Yoshiaki Koizumi is the main guy responsible for the character designs. He did a lot for this game, including making Navi, and getting everybody to go to that place so they can make Z-targeting. He's a legend. And the other character designers deserve some more love too. Here, look at all these pictures I have of them. You could tell this one was taken by a Korean. The linear nature of the Shadow Temple allows for some great puzzle progression. I like this room a lot where you can use the iron boots to keep from getting blown away by these guys. And afterwards, there's a gap which we can't cross. So you have to wait for the fan to stop blowing just at the right time so you can switch over and make a run for it with the hover boots. This is also before entering another room that requires the same strategy, but now you have to find the right fan that blows you towards progress while avoiding others. That kind of progression is something you can really only do with a linear design, so it's great that they took full advantage of it. With how deep you go into this place, there's really no better way to end the dungeon than having Link jump down a huge hole into a black void to fight Bongo Bonger. I wonder if this boss is a reference to Andross at all. It's the same concept where you have to disable his hands before you can start doing some real damage. The fight is so cool too. You gotta use your bow and the lens of truth to keep track of where his body is. And since you're standing on a drum, you'll bounce a bit when he hits the floor and need to reorient yourself. We find out after that the sage here is Impa, who went in here earlier to try and steal Bongo again. I really like the idea that Impa was here before us because it means she already took out some of the enemies and solved some of the rooms herself probably, meaning that there's an even more dangerous version of the Shadow Temple that exists somewhere in time. I love the idea of that. It makes me wish Zelda could have come out. It was supposed to be a remaster of the game with harder dungeons and extra features. There was eventually a Master Quest version released on GameCube for people that pre-ordered Wind Waker, and Miyamoto said that this is Zelda, but nobody believes him. This version just has remixed dungeons. It doesn't have any of the extra features or the new locations was supposed to have. There's this guy named Nintendo Mad who had a lot of knowledge about back in the day, and he made a thread about it on assemblergames.com after he got a copy of the disc. But it was closed after because Nintendo didn't want a discussion of it, and later it was discovered that Nintendo Mad fucking died, unfortunately. So now somebody's doing an Zelda ROM hack that tries reconstructing the original idea, but he has to lay low like a terrorist or something because the Facebook page dedicated to its phone number suggests the guy relocated to an island in Aruba or something. Miyamoto must know some guys in real high places disabling the brakes on people's cars, which is also why he doesn't age. He clearly has the serum. I mean, look at him. I was 4 at the time and I look completely different now. See, Miyamoto thinks he's got it all figured out. He thinks he can pull the wool over my eyes, but it's not gonna work because I've got the lens of truth. And speaking of that, there's actually one more minigame in Hyrule Castle that I haven't talked about yet. You can only do it at night, which is real cool. It's a bit shadier than Bomb Chew Bowling because we're gambling here. You have 2 chests. One has a key and the other a rupee. If you get a rupee, the game ends, but if you get the key, you can use it on the door and play another round. And if you guess right 5 times in a row, you'll get a heart piece. So basically you need to win a 50-50 exchange 5 times in a row. So I did the math, and that's a 0.03125 probability, or 3.12% chance. That's an average of 32 attempts, or 320 rupees to win a heart piece. That's a fourth of a heart container, which you can also get from talking to a guy on a roof and lose from getting grazed by a bat. So yeah, it's not really worth it. But thankfully, you can use the lens of truth to cheat and get the right chest every time. I like that the game lets you be a bit mischievous like that. It's real fun. One last medallion, and it's in the Spirit Temple. Link really has to do a lot of these things. He's crazy. You know, I tried to put myself in Link's shoes one time, and I couldn't think of a single dungeon I'd be able to complete as myself. I'd never have the guts to jump off the top of the Deku Tree. I'd definitely drown in the Water Temple. I'd like run away from all those spiders. There's those Deku Babas. Like, I could probably take one of them on. Not like the ones that lunge at you, but the ones that kind of just like spin around. Yeah, I could probably beat one of them. It really kind of puts into perspective how cool Link is, but it's a bit abstract. It's hard to comprehend how much Link is actually doing for the world. This is why on our way to the Spirit Temple, we meet this carpenter whose guys got imprisoned by the Gerudo for trespassing on their turf as men, so we gotta save them. Even though things like this are a small act that don't go a long way in helping Hyrule, I feel much more like a hero saving these guys than I do from beating a dragon or a dungeon. Those just give me medallions that are only really used to build this little piece of rainbow road over here and let me get into Ganon's castle, and I could do that shit myself with a Game Shark. It helps a lot when you can put a face on a good deed. Like all the Gorons we saved in the Fire Temple, or Talon and Malon after giving Long Lawn Ranch back to them. These are some people we've talked to previously and know on some level, which makes it easy for us to connect. We can't really comprehend something like saving the world or defeating evil. Those are very abstract concepts, but we can connect with making someone's life better, and doing that continuously helps put into perspective what we're trying to accomplish on a larger scale. But I love that even with all of that, no one really cares. Like, yeah, Link is the hero of time and all that, but no one in the world actually like really gives a shit. They're just trying to get through the day like anyone else. So when Link waltzes into the Gerudo Fortress like he owns the place, expecting them to just open the gates so he can go into the Spirit Temple because he's the most important guy in the world, he gets treated like a black man who's been to private school his whole life, going into the world for the first time to start applying for jobs. Yeah, these chicks have a society, whether Link exists or not, and they don't like men. To save the carpenters, you have to find them throughout the Gerudo Fortress. And on the way there, you have to stop from being spotted by guards or you get put back in jail. They never close the window though, so you can just go out right away and try again like in Seattle. I actually like this segment a bit. You can tell they cared about it. If you're hiding behind crates or walls, they won't be able to see you. And the first-person perspective with aiming feels right at home with this gameplay. It's not Splinter Cell or Metal Gear Solid, but it's a fun enough segment. Shooting the guards is pretty intense. Like, normally enemies I kill just disappear or break into pieces, but this bitch is just laying on the floor. I think she's dead. I feel like I should be worried about her. I mean, she was just kind of doing her job on patrol, and none of the other guards even care. They never go like, oh shit, Anushka is dead. Link, do you care? I guess not. I guess that was inside of you the whole time. Let's go get the Triforce, I guess. That's crazy. I never think about how much carnage I'm causing in games like that, or even the decisions made in these games in general. Like, sometimes I'll drop my keys and pick them up and think, oh my god, they gave Shadow a gun. And Amy's having periods. Every time you save a carpenter, a Gerudo soldier will show up and fight, and they're real fun. It's a lot like the Selphos, but if you get hit a couple of times, Link will go down and get thrown back in jail. So you have to be a bit more on the defensive. Link doesn't care though, he just Ray Rices that bitch in the corner. After displaying the skills to free all the carpenters, the Gerudos think we're pretty cool and give us a reservation card so now we can drink with the natives. There's some cool stuff you can do, like this target minigame where you ride Epona. It's a fun little mix-up. Instead of shooting at moving objects, now we're the ones moving, and it's something to adapt to. You know, that sound effect isn't as satisfying when I heard it like 100 times. That one is always great though. It reminds me of finding my prostate. The gates that way you go to the Spirit Temple are also opened, but you have to wander through the desert first to get there. Enemies will pop up from the ground to do some chip damage, but whatever. I have 18 hearts. That's way more health than you ever need in this game, but I couldn't help myself. I gotta get all the heart pieces. It's one of the only optional things you can do in the game, and getting them often involves a fun challenge or clever problem solving. I like it a lot more than getting skulltulas, since that's basically just spatial awareness testing, and sometimes calling the Scarecrow. Plus, after you get 50 of them, it's a totally redundant challenge. You've gotten all the rewards that matter. Getting all 100 just gives you infinite rupees, but at that point it's the end of the game. Like, what do I need them for? I don't think they intended anybody to actually get all of them. It's just 100 so you can have some leeway with things. You don't need to stress about getting every single one, just half of them, which is completely achievable from just exploring around the world a bit and searching rooms and dungeons where skulltulas are audible. Right away with the Spirit Temple, you're locked out of any progress. There's a block we can't push and a crawl space we can't enter, so all you can do is leave. But thankfully Sheik shows up with a cool POV shot to teach us the final warp song. Quit trying to be jazzy. You know, even though I love all these songs, I think they knew having to memorize them all just to warp around was a bit much. They each take 5 to 8 inputs, and first-timers will often have to pause and wait for links so they can look at the sheet music. In Majora, they improved things a lot by just having a single 3-note song that lets you warp to any of the owl statues that you've hit throughout the map. It's a lot more convenient. I've already brought up the time mechanic a bit and some of the cool things you can do with it, like beam planting or learning the Song of Storms, but I like how the Spirit Temple works it into an actual dungeon. We have to use a Requiem of Spirit to come back here as both a kid and an adult, and each link has its own path that leads to the central area. That's something that makes this game so strong. The dungeon layouts are always unique and have a different pace from one another to keep you on your toes a bit. You know, I don't know. I'm just thinking a little bit about this stuff, you know, spitballing here. But, you know, do you think when Link goes back to, like, you know, being a kid, you know, you think he goes back to Kokiri Forest and teaches everybody all the bad words? As a young Link, you meet a character here called Naburu who's trying to sabotage Ganon. I like her. She doesn't have much dialogue, but they still manage to inject some personality into her. But at this point, I have to draw the line. I can't ignore the fact that Link has a harem of chicks that like him that he's been collecting over the game. Miyamoto is actually the one who wanted this. He said, since Link is a boy, I wanted girls besides Princess Zelda to show up. But even with all of this attention, Link never really seems all that interested. I understand though. There's really not any winners. Sorry is cool and all, but like when Link gets older, it starts to get a little weird. Malon seems to like Link, like it's implied in the Gossip Stones. Her dad tries to set us up with her too. But I don't know, she's a bit low class. Like she definitely opens her car door all wide and dings whoever's parked next to her. Rudo's always talking about marriage. I don't think I need to spell out the problem here. Zelda obviously likes him and you know, she's real sweet. She wears dresses and plays the harp all the time, but you know, she probably also likes to get choked. The fact is that none of them compare to Navi. None of them are going to explore dungeons with me and warn me about wall masters. Link doesn't need any of these chicks. He's got true companionship that they could never provide. Naburu talks a big game, but she gets kidnapped not even halfway into the Spirit Temple and we gotta time travel to save her. Switching between the different Links is really cool. This big room with the statue is actually the only place both adult and child Link can be in aside from the entrance, and it makes it always stand out in my head. One thing I really wish this dungeon had were some puzzles where you have to set some things up as young Link that you can pay off as an adult, because even in this room, they basically don't do anything that intersects. It's cool how Young Link's sections build some puzzles around his couple unique mechanics like the boomerang and lighting matches with the Deku Stick, but it'd be cool if solving these puzzles was only part 1. It moves you forward as Young Link, but also creates or alters an object or the layout that lets you progress with your tools as an adult. Instead though, both Links take completely separate paths for the most part. You just get the Iron Gauntlet so you can go back to being an adult and push this block out of the way so you can get through the second half. But it makes sense. I imagine somebody on the team probably did propose doing the Spirit Temple with a little bit more intersecting, but got shut down. Because in comparison, two self-contained areas are way easier to design than having them intersect in any way. Even in the statue room, they're having to block off doors to keep either Link from being somewhere they shouldn't be. It's real error-prone and requires testing and careful design to keep sequence breaks from happening. It could also be too complicated for the kids playing the game. They might do a puzzle right and set things up, but then not understand that it's not something that they have to interact with until they're an adult, and they'll waste several hours trying to figure it out as young Link. It's very easy for me to sit here on the sidelines and think about how things could have been more interesting in hindsight, but the truth is that OOT is such a big game that they probably had less time to make these dungeons than it took some people to actually beat them. Ocarina took 2.5 years to make. That may seem like a long time until you chart it out and get some perspective. If the game just had 10 dungeons in it, not including Ganon's Tower, and implying that there aren't any last minute changes to mess up the schedule like there always are, every dungeon has 3 months to get done. 90 days. But you don't get all of that. Japanese don't work on Sundays, so it's actually more like 78. If you're working full-time 9 to 5 in the dungeon, 617 hours is actually how long you have. And you spent like an hour or two watching this thing. That implies you don't also have like items to implement and characters and areas to design in the game, like Hyrule Field, all the towns and the inhabitants that make the world feel like a real place, all the debugging and stuff too. It also implies that some dungeons won't need more effort and care put into them than others. The truth is that it takes a lot of work to develop a game. Look at this shit. It's no surprise this game got delayed by a whole year. Games are made by people, but I feel like everybody forgets what that means. We're not productivity machines, so even 617 hours isn't guaranteed or should be guaranteed. People need to take a break for lunch and socializing. They need time to think through decisions. They have families that require their time and energy. Sometimes people get sick. Sometimes they fucking die. Sometimes a disgruntled former employee comes by for a surprise visit. I imagine that when Miyamoto was thinking about this game in the early stages, the vision was fairly different from what the finished product was. At the end of the day, a game can never fully realize the original intent. It only approximates it within the allowed time. You gotta embrace that a little bit and go with the flow of things. The game doesn't need to be perfect to be a 10 out of 10. It just has to be great for the player playing through the game for the first time who can let the experience wash over them. Not me, who's played this shit like 5 times and rewatched footage and looks at the maps and has 19 hearts and reads the Sheikah war crimes. And there's a lot to get absorbed in with this dungeon. I love the hieroglyphs on the wall especially. That's Gerudo language. And they actually do correlate to Roman letters. They don't say anything meaningful though in this game. It's just for looks. But it makes the place seem like it has some real history and culture to the people that used to hang out here. The same way the Forest Temple does. I think the best design in the Spirit Temple are the sunlight puzzles. The game does a great job of easing the player into feeling totally comfortable solving these. At first, you use a Bonshu in this room, which shows you that these sun guys react to light. Then you're given a mirror that lets you redirect light from a source in a fixed direction. And then finally, you get the mirror shield that gives you full control over that direction. It's buttery smooth. This is one of the only dungeons that has an instrument playing in it with like a melody. Who's playing it? Like when you fight Ganon later on in the game, you find out he's the guy playing the piano, but who's the sad guy on the sax? One of the great things about being young Link in this dungeon too is fighting these much more dangerous enemies but at a much smaller size. The Stalfos are really imposing, they just tower over you. You can tell how nervous it's making me. You're supposed to wait for these little moments during their attacks where they don't have their shields up and I'm just throwing nuts like it's December. The Lizalfos also make a return, but this time you have 18 hearts and know all about the world, so they don't even get mini-boss music. They ain't shit. Look at him quivering. He's about to turn back into McConnell. I love when games do this. Having an old boss or mini-boss just show up as a generic enemy in the late game really contextualizes your growth. Yeah, contextualizes. You like that? I'm getting fancy here. That's a GRE word. You know, I didn't know what a bomb chew was until like 2011. No one told me this was gonna happen. There's no bomb chew bag. You never like use them in Melee. They just kind of pop up out of nowhere without warning. Then you use one. It's like, whoa, what the fuck? There's only 2 puzzles that take advantage of their abilities, but I'm happy to see them get some time in the spotlight because they're a really cool item. Bomb chew bowling should be in the Olympics. One enemy I don't see people really talk about are these guys, the Anubis. They mirror Link's position around the center of the room and shoot fire at him. In every room with them, there's a firewall you can trigger that you have to move them towards. Both puzzles involving Anubises are really unique, and the fire being shot at you creates some urgency in figuring out how to position Link. Or you can just cheat and cast Din's fire. Like, that's not as fun, but I like that it gives you the option and rewards you for intuition. This is also the debut of the Dark Nuts in this game. They hit really hard. You have to be pretty careful, but their AI is simple. It's all about leaning in and then quickly getting back to avoid moves, and you can get punished hard for using attacks with a lot of recovery frames like the jump slash. What's really cool about them though is the destructible environment, which you can use to your advantage to build distance and get hearts back. There's also 2 parts to the fight. After knocking their armor off, they'll get way more aggressive and run after you. They honestly outshine the boss, which takes advantage of the mirror shield in a fun way, but it also has a lot of standing around waiting for animations. In the second phase especially, they'll start throwing either fire or ice magic, and you'll have to store it in the mirror shield 3 times to deflect the attack. It makes sense for her to mix it up with the elements every time, so you have to pay attention to know whether you should get out of the way or stand your ground. The moves are even telegraphed well, as if this is how the fight was supposed to go, but instead it works off a cycle of 3, so as long as you don't immediately jump out of the way, you basically never need to avoid an attack. It also means if you miss a cycle, it's a real drag. You either have to start over with a new element or wait 3 turns before she gives you the one element you want. Oh shit. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Oh yeah! 20 hearts. Man, Ganon's gonna shit himself when he sees me now. I can't help but feel like it doesn't matter in the long run though, because in Majora's Mask it's back to 3 hearts. Like sure, Link can do cartwheels and stuff, but if he falls off the roof, he's gonna die. I guess that means the canon playthrough for these games would be the limited items run. A challenge run that involves never picking up anything not 100% needed to complete the game. People will do that. They'll play this game in all kinds of ways.
Just doing backflips saying bitch.
You can look up Ocarina of Time on Twitch right now, and no matter what time of the day it is, there'll always be some guy playing it with 0 emotions, and he's got like a timer going, trying to see how fast he can beat Zelda before he blows his head off. Look at this guy. He doesn't give a fuck. He's in such a rush, he doesn't care how Link feels.
Which doesn't matter, because we don't even have Drop Sanity on.
This guy's wearing pajamas here. He's cozy. He's gotten so tired of looking at Link all the time that he's made him look like Peter Pan. Oh my god, Link! When you rescue a sage, do they just kind of like hang out in this little room forever? It looks real depressing. Every time I come here, I'm just trying to get out as fast as possible. Especially now, we got all the medallions, so there's a real important cutscene that's about to play. Link gets told that he has the Triforce of Courage, and the camera even pushes in towards Link, but he still doesn't care, even a little bit. Sheik also turns back into Zelda, and it's supposed to be this big cool moment, but this is a real bad move. Zelda should have just stayed in her Sheikah form because she has a great chain grab on Ganondorf as well as neutral options that base Zelda can't compete with. Now all she has is Bear and Fair, so she gets kidnapped immediately and Link has to carry what should have been a free 2v1. This is a continuous problem in all the games, really. I don't really get it. In Wind Waker, Tetra is like this really cool pirate chick with a lot of personality, but then when she's revealed to be Zelda, she just goes back to being some timid little plain Jane. Well, it's finally come to the end here, so it's time to fight Ganondorf. Nah, I'm just kidding. First, we gotta do the Gerudo Training Grounds. I know we all love the Gerudo Training Grounds here. I've always been a bit confused about Gerudo. Like, what are they supposed to be? Like, are they like Indian or maybe like Northern African? Hey, this is totally optional. You don't need to do this dungeon at all, and the reward is the ice arrows, which are probably the most useless item in the game. They most likely made these and had literally nowhere to put them, so they just kind of put it in here for the hell of it. But because the dungeon is optional, they can make things a lot more difficult than usual. These rooms are full of real scary guys, and you need to use the lens of truth constantly to find keys. Unlike other dungeons that gatekeep you from making progress until you found enough keys, the training grounds instead give you total freedom to just go ahead. The keys are still here, but they're saved until the end. The more you get along the way, the more prizes you get. You don't need to be perfect though. The prize room has multiple entrances, and some require less keys than others to get the ice arrows. I think that bit of leniency is a good idea. Even if you're designing for a hardcore player, it's still a bit unreasonable to expect them to do everything perfectly. Even arcade-style games like shmup still give you multiple lives and bombs. Chokes are inevitable. The best rooms here have you mixing all your different items together to solve some puzzles. This place can only be accessed after getting all the other items, meaning that there's no limitations and they can go crazy with the setups. Some of these rooms are real hard to get through. Like, did Ganon manage to do all this crap? Like, he's Gerudo, so these are kind of like his training grounds. But he also doesn't have the best vertical jump. I'd love to see his run. I wonder if he has any strats. Isn't that cool though? Like a totally optional dungeon that you never even really have to look at. The detail and scale of this game is crazy. It makes you forget how minimal these games start out and how much things change. Like I said earlier, Ocarina of Time had a somewhat rocky development, but the boys were feeling themselves by the end of '97 and were chill with sharing some screenshots. An early version of the game could also be played at E3 of whatever the fuck this was. I like looking back and trying to get a feel for what their headspace was and seeing what changed. Look at some of this, it's real cool. I wish they kept Navi turning red while targeting. It was a great idea, like she's all mad at the enemy. Maybe they just felt it was a little distracting. And look at this screenshot. This looks like Mario died, and now Link has to fight Bowser. Sometimes it feels like the only idea they kept in this game was being able to play as Link. And even though his design was revised several times, Miyamoto said he didn't want Adult Link to look too cool, but he did want him to look a little cool, and you can see that balance. Like, he looks a bit silly with the earrings and the tights, but he also has this determined look on his face and this Leonardo DiCaprio haircut. In recent games though, they've made Link too much of a pretty boy. Look at him. I'd fuck the shit out of him. The biggest cause for the lengthy development of Ocarina though was the switch from the DD to a regular cartridge. The DD, or a Nintendo 64 disk drive for people who don't know, was made to allow for games to have more storage space since cartridges were a bit limited in that regard, and a lot of Nintendo's first party games were being developed with this in mind, like Mario 64 2, Kirby's Air Ride, and Mother 3, but mainly Zelda 64. Plans had to change though after the dumb disk drive expansion kept getting delayed for 2 fucking years. It spent forever hyping this thing up too, but by the time they released it, less than 15,000 people bought it, and all they had to play was kid pics featuring Mario. I really don't know what the problem was. Nintendo did this shit in the 80s with no issues, but a decade later, now all of a sudden it's a huge problem. I think the scope was just too big. Like, it couldn't just be a disk drive expansion. Nah, they wanted you being able to browse the web and send email with it too. You could barely do that shit on the computer at the time, let alone on a video game console. You could buy things and like send people postcards with Mario's face on them. I guess in hindsight, it would have been real innovative if they pulled it off, since Sega always gets praised for similar features on the Dreamcast, but that was also Sega's last hurrah as a console developer, so the praise was mostly kind of out of pity, like cheering on the midget after he throws a football during the halftime show. While all these problems were happening, Zelda 64 kept trucking along, but it meant that the game spent a while at several different stages of development, and it's interesting to see. Back in the day, all you had was Space World and E3 footage like what I showed before, but it also wasn't the best quality. Recently though, it's become a lot easier to see the process in a more hands-on way through these early builds that have been discovered and leaked. You can see some early assets and maps like this primitive version of the graveyard or the wood temple, which has these really cool windows and seems to be kind of like an early version of the Deku Tree. All of these maps are pretty empty, but that's normal early on in development. In fact, nothing ever really looks like how it should until it's almost finished. That's why you can't ever get discouraged when you start making something and it doesn't pan out the way you wanted right away. Any creative venture always starts with some very vague, like barely connected ideas, and you have to be brave by experimenting with things and making mistakes before you start getting a strong understanding of how things ought to be, and the implementation can actually start to solidify. And by the end, as long as you put your heart into it, you'll have something really special. Ocarina may have had some delays and frustrations, but even with that, the game doesn't just feel finished. It feels truly alive and it's full of extras. And a lot of the beta locations and ideas are still there in some way. It's especially great to know that even early on, they plan for you to be able to see Kakariko from the distance of Death Mountain. I always loved that little bit. I just thought it was like a small addition for consistency. So it makes me real happy to know some guys on the team cared about it as much as I did. What? Well, I'd be lying if I said everything was finished. The ice arrows are still just kind of an idea with no application, which is why they're a reward for the optional dungeon. I tried using them on the water, but nothing happened because this isn't Majora's Mask. It's kind of cool though. It's kind of like you have this old janky unfinished part of the game as memento, just hanging out in your inventory. Here, check it out. I got everything actually. Look at all these songs. Got all the items. Link's all pimped out. We're ready to go. Ganon's castle is floating far away, so the sages use their powers to build a bridge. Originally, the medallions were supposed to give Link some special abilities, but they kind of scrapped it. I wonder what they had in mind since they already had the 3 magic spells. Maybe that's what they were originally going to be, but they couldn't figure out what they could do for like light, shadow, or like spirit spells. It's kind of hard to think about it. Like, what would that look like? Link summons a ghost, turns on a light. For being the final area of the game, Ganon's castle isn't really the gauntlet you'd expect. Instead, it's 6 rooms with their own challenges representing the previous temples, and you have to break the barrier in all of them before tackling the end. Originally, the whole game was kind of supposed to take place here and have this structure. Miyamoto wanted to do it like Mario 64, and you can see what he was thinking with the layout of this place, and there's even a fun remnant from an earlier stage of development. The Forest Temple is supposed to be the Wind Temple and have all these old fans in it. I can't say I'm sad since it was replaced with the best temple in the game, but it's cool the idea is still here in some way. What's weird though is that every room isn't totally self-contained like it should be. Some rooms require these gold gauntlets, which you get in the Wind Room, and I actually forgot to do the puzzle here to get them. I was just so focused on beating Ganon and breaking barriers that I forgot that I needed it. It's so weird. It's only really used for 1 silver rupee in the Fire Room, getting into the Light Room, and also to get an upgrade outside to level up my defense as if I'm not already impenetrable with all these hearts and a fairy. It kind of messes with the pace a bit. There's no real fun to these. I just listed all of their uses. It's not like you can do some cool post-game exploration or anything. I really don't get it. Oh no, it's invisible. I don't give a shit. I got 20 hearts. After removing the barriers, you're put on a very linear path to Ganon, and I really love the mood of this. You fight a gauntlet of the most hard-hitting enemies in succession, and slowly ascend the castle as the ambient noise playing throughout the rest of the castle is slowly overpowered by a church organ. And it just gets louder and louder with every new room until you finally get to Ganon and see he's been the one playing it. Ganon doesn't waste any time here. The fight just starts immediately. Oh shit. Oh man, when I get up there, you're gonna be sorry. Just wait there a bit, okay? Just like a little bit. Yeah, you're messing with the wrong guy here, pal. This fight is similar to the Phantom Ganon fight, where you need to ping-pong his magic back and forth, but you also need to shoot him with light arrows before you can actually jump in to attack. There's a lot that can go wrong in this process, and it usually leads to falling to this room below. This isn't just to punish you, there's jars with items and magic down here, which is important actually, since you need magic to use light arrows. It makes me wonder if they intend to throw you off at the beginning and have you fall, just so you can be in this room and like know that you have places to refill your stuff if you need them. The lighting effects here are just like next level. When Ganon gets hit with light arrows, the effect just brings the N64 to its knees. The whole room goes dark as if the light arrows are so bright that your eyes need to adjust. It's so cool. It's awesome. After winning the fight, the tower starts crumbling and you have to make your way downstairs. It's mainly cinematic, but it does a great job of building tension because you're on a time limit and need Zelda to open doors. She's extremely slow, and if you get hit, she just stands there. Yeah, it'd be real nice if you were Sheik right now. Even though the castle is in ruins, Ganon is still alive and wants a run back, starting one of my favorite bosses in any game. The presentation peaks here. I love the lighting at the end of the game, it's perfect, but nothing really shows it off like this does. The only things illuminated are Ganon's eyes, his sword, and the light arrows. Lightning will strike randomly to help illuminate things a bit, but otherwise the total lack of any light makes me feel like I'm playing some sort of epic scene from a Baroque painting, and the music just adds to the tone with this rolling snare drum out of a military march playing over this somber choir. Despite the crippling limitations of the N64, they completely kill it with this and manage to make an end boss that feels like a proper conclusion to this huge journey. But you gotta be careful that you don't hurt the moment-to-moment gameplay with the presentation. Ganon's eyes and blades always being illuminated are enough to let you know his orientation and see when he's winding up an attack. And that's important because Ganon hits hard and is somewhat of a threat even with all the upgrades. If you try to just brute force him, you'll get your ass kicked. You have to have some intuition and roll under him to get the opening on his tail. I love that you beat him by exploiting his size like that. The Ganon we met earlier that was playing playing his organ, feeling totally in control, isn't there anymore, and at this point he's just trying to win with sheer power, which he has the Triforce of. Link doesn't need any of those fancy tricks to win though, he just needs the courage to get behind him. Even when Ganon starts the fight by knocking away your sword, it doesn't really matter. Link can still go toe to toe just with the light arrows. That's why Link is so cool. He doesn't win because he has this like special sword. He wins because of his ability to adapt and gain control over any situation and come out on top, even one that seems impossible. The ending is pretty standard afterwards. Ganon dies and Zelda lets Link have a proper childhood so he doesn't do Michael Jackson shit. But we're left with this great final shot of Navi and Link going their separate ways. Link walks towards the camera and out of the frame, showing just the Master Sword by itself as the music crescendos to its ending with these powerful sounding church bells that makes us feel like we just fucking beat the game, and sets up the sequel where Link has a bad trip and dies in the woods. I never understood why Navi leaves at the end though. It kind of feels like you're dating a chick and she bails right as you're starting to get your shit together. There's a lot of speculation about her intentions, which can be a fun discussion in the wintertime when you got some tea going and like a cat or something. But I find myself more attracted to the small side characters you meet along the way in this game. So it's nice that the credits mainly focus on seeing everybody you tried to help being happy, you know, and celebrating. It's totally satisfying and ends with a young Link and Zelda looking at each other, similar to the scene early on in the game. It gets you thinking about everything that's happened since then. All the dungeons and characters, maybe even your own life. This game is a bit lengthy, so you know, it's possible some events might have happened in between. It's a really beautiful ending. Ocarina took a lot of its structure and environments from A Link to the Past, and I think they really just wanted to translate 2D Zelda's gameplay into 3D, but in doing so, they ended up innovating on a lot of 3D mechanics that are now standard, and that's why it gets so much praise. But I think it's a bit of a disservice to call Ocarina the best game of all time. It creates such a big expectation which will just taint your experience. It's like trying a new food for the first time while everybody looks at you, including the waiter, who tells you you're gonna fucking come when you taste this shit. But you don't, and there's too much pressure to even enjoy it properly, so instead you vomit everywhere from the stress and somebody takes a video of the whole thing and uploads it to TikTok. If I was getting ready to go down the stairs and somebody called me the best stair traverser to ever live, I'd fucking eat shit on the way down. All of this is media hype and you really shouldn't buy into any of that. Just find a way to play it and give it a shot if you like a game that gives the player a balance of action, adventure, puzzles, and an open door to soak into its world of cozy polygons. Because if you play the game putting aside what it did for the industry, you'll still find a worthwhile experience. I love the focus on music in this one too. For old time's sake, I went through every song Link knows how to play in one sitting. Just listening to the songs and watching him control the weather and teleport everywhere using his ocarina. I thought, man, I wish music could do some magical stuff IRL, but it kind of does, you know? It makes us feel emotions and relive standout memories and can inspire us towards our accomplishments, and sometimes you might want to dance to it or like tap your foot, which is real fun. Dungeons are engaging and always do a great job keeping you on your toes with diverse layouts and gimmicks. And despite Ocarina having derivative stuff from A Link to the Past, it still has a lot of its own original ideas like the whale or the time mechanics. There's a lot of diversity in environments and the people you interact with. It feels like a cohesive world. Later games in the series have iterated on the combat a lot, but it's still fun in Ocarina thanks to the enemy variety. Ocarina's mechanics in general have been improved upon as the series has continued, and yet it's still an extremely relevant game in the series. Even Twilight Princess, which I think does a lot to try and recapture the magic of Ocarina on more modern hardware, still doesn't replace it. And these are all great games themselves. I could have done a 2-hour video celebrating any of these really, but Ocarina is the most special to me. There's a really strong atmosphere I see people talk about with other Zelda games, and rightfully so, but not as much with this one for some reason. When it comes to this game in particular, there's this large variety in tone. I talked about Kakariko since it's the most obvious example, but it's everywhere in this game. You spend some time in these really peaceful towns hanging out with friendly natives before exploring these dungeons with spooky shit playing in the back. As you switch from different ages, Hyrule Castle is constantly shifting from a fun, populated town with minigames to a deserted, crumpled up wasteland with zombies everywhere. And yet despite how dour the world can get, especially as an adult, the game still has this optimism to it. The music in Hyrule never stops being cheery no matter how bad things get, and I really like that. There's also this big sense of mystery to Hyrule in this game, like the origin of the temples, or the nature of the Lost Woods after the guide disappears. There's also this guy who you can race to Kokiri Forest, but no matter how fast you go, he'll always win. As a kid, it really gets the imagination going. Like, what if I could beat him? What would he say? Will he give me the Triforce? I think that's why people have spent a lot of time trying to find super hidden rooms with secrets in them and shit, or discovering game-breaking methods to beat it at world record times. The game just radiates this mysterious aura that's fun to immerse yourself in. So yeah, this game is really good. Play it on 3DS if you hate taking your shoes on and off.